Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my monthly compendium for the month of March 2022. Case file number 541, written by Nevron14, Lines Between Life and Death. I work at a financial institution, and as part of my role, I coordinate training for all new hires within the first few weeks of their onboarding. The process begins when local managers send me the names and contact details of the new hirees, so I can reach out to them for a brief introduction and to set the expectations of the training material. Prior to the start of the pandemic, I would simply reach out to the new hiree at their new office phone number. However, with the new WFH changes, I would now reach out to mobile numbers and residential phone numbers. All in all, a very similar process to what I was doing before, just with the caveat of having to reach out to people at home. A bit easier, really. As per usual, I received a new spreadsheet with the names and info of the new hirees I needed to contact when I came across a quite unique name. I picked up my headset and dialed the number provided. New hiree. Hello, this is name. Me. Hi, good morning. This is me, calling from financial institution. Did I catch you at a good time? Yes, this is great. However, could you please call me at my landline? My mobile service is not very reliable in this area. I wrote down the phone number she provided and we hung up. Immediately, I dialed the phone number and waited for the dial tone. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. An older woman answers. Hello? Hi, good morning. My name is me, and I'm looking for new hiree. Can I speak to her? Sorry. Who are you? I'm me, calling from financial institution. She asked me to call her back on this line. Is she available? Silence. Hello? What do you mean she asked you to call her back? When? I was just talking to her and she said reception in the area is not very reliable and to please call her back at this number. I'm sorry, but that's impossible. Name of new hiree died 3 days ago. Is this telephone number provided by new hiree? Yes, that is correct. I'm sorry, I may have written down the number incorrectly. I apologize for the inconvenience and I'm very sorry about your loss. I hung up and was lost for words. I somehow managed to write down the wrong phone number and reached a residence with a recently deceased person who had the same unique name. I'm certain I wrote down the correct number, but it is possible that the poor connection made me write a different number. I don't know what to think. This is an odd coincidence, at the very least. I reached back out to the new hiree's mobile number and asked her to share the phone number again and confirm the number I dialed was correct. I was certain she would give me a different number where the digits were flipped and it might have just been a small dyslexia moment. I'm not so sure I was pranked by a family member, but it is possible that a senior resident with a mental disability might have answered and given me that info. Regardless, I didn't question the new hiree as it is none of my business if other residents live there and have access to the phone line. The next call I made back to her landline, the new hiree picked up, but it was the same number. Case notes, file number 541. I've realized this for a while now, how ghosts, the echoes of people's past, they're imprinted on a small geographic area of importance to them, well, to who they were. And these entities emit strong EM fields that can mess with, and sometimes, I believe, also control and influence electronic devices, such as phones. It wouldn't surprise me if this call was intercepted intentionally by whoever had passed away at that first address. No doubt they can alter the signal sent to the receiver, like 1 digit dialed. So you may have dialed the same number, but it was switched by this entity, or just intercepted. There's more to this than raw will, though. If it was as simple as it sounds, well, then these imprints would be messing with our phones all the time in order to talk to their loved ones who are still alive. Perhaps there are some sort of cosmic rules in place to limit how often they can do this. I don't know. I wonder how much it costs to use the phone as a ghost. Can't be that expensive, right? Bonus file, written by Caristi. Sometimes all you need is a good dream hug. In November, my dad had a hemorrhagic stroke, and it was pretty severe. He was awake for the first few days, then it was a constant up and down. On Thanksgiving, I got a call from the hospital that he had another stroke on the other side of his brain, and we needed to talk about end-of-life care. I had the first dream that night. We were sitting on his back porch at the table, and I was a sobbing mess. I kept saying that I couldn't believe he was going to leave me, and he kept laughing and making a joke out of it. He said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I told him I was going to climb in the casket with him. He laughed and reminded me that he was not going in a casket, he was going to be cremated. He passed away 3 days later. The second dream was a day or two after. I don't remember much except I was crying again and saying how much I missed him. I don't think he was hugging me back in this one, but I do remember him saying sorry and that it'll be okay. The third and final dream I had was very similar to the second one. I was ugly crying and hugging him, saying that I missed him and I can't believe he left me. This time he hugged me back and I could really feel it. It was such a good hug. It was so calming and made me feel loved. I stopped crying in my dream and just felt okay for the first time in weeks. I haven't had a dream like that since. I still dream about him, but it's so different from these 3 dreams. There's no feeling of sadness or talk of his death, just normal dream shenanigans. I know it's possible that it was just my brain trying to help me cope with the loss, but to me, it felt like he was checking in with me to see how I was and to say goodbye. I miss him so much. Every night I look forward to drifting off into dreamland in hopes of another hug from him. Creepy File number 12, written by Mammoth Permission 48, the so-called maintenance man. I'm a single male, 33, who lives alone in Denver. My apartment complex is not what you'd call a nice building. I'm on a road close to Colfax Avenue, which, if you're familiar with the geography of this area, is not the safest boulevard in town. I'm a few streets away from it, but close enough that I wouldn't consider this an up-and-coming neighborhood. This evening I was watching Netflix on my couch. My 2 cats were cuddled up against me as I lay under a comforter. The night before, I had watched a horror movie that was scary enough to leave me in an unsettled mood, making it hard to sleep. So tonight, I decided to watch a stand-up special instead. Keep it light so I wouldn't have any trouble getting some shut-eye. I have classes early in the next morning, so I was surprised when I made the conscious decision to turn on a second stand-up special and let myself fall asleep on the couch. I was just so comfy where I lay and didn't want to move, not even to turn off the several lights on throughout my apartment. I remember dozing off around 11 o'clock. It was effortless, which meant I was really snug under the covers with my cats flanking me on either end, creating a tucked-in feeling. I fell into a dream wherein I was on an impromptu date with this guy, whom I didn't recognize, at a Blockbuster video store. He bought me blue and yellow underwear, like a Blockbuster would sell in Dreamland, insinuating I would take the hint of his intentions. He was also desperate for a job, so when we got to the counter, he was given an off-the-cuff interview that didn't go well. And all of a sudden, I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm woken up by a knock at my door. There's a man's voice and says, "Maintenance." I just sat there, sitting bolt upright on my couch. I knew something was off. I looked at my phone, which was by my left hand, and the time was 2:15 a.m. I didn't move. The floors in my apartment are old wood, and there are many creaky floorboards. I didn't want whoever was knocking to know someone was at home and awake, let alone alert to his presence. My cats got up and ran over to the door, as they normally would, but I stayed still and listened. After a few minutes with no answer, the man walked away from the door and down the hallway to the stairs. A moment after that, I heard the back door to the building swing open and closed. I have one window where I have a partial view of that door, so I break my paralysis and race over to it. I saw an old-looking green SUV sitting in the no parking zone just in front of the back door. It must have been running the entire time because I didn't hear it start up and the brake lights were glowing red. Someone, presumably the maintenance man, got in the car and drove it off. I don't know what his intentions were, but no one knocks on someone's door at 2:15 a.m. claiming to work for the landlord with good deeds in mind. Had it been a true emergency, wouldn't he have knocked again, used his service key to get into the unit? What did I just avoid here? I can only assume it was an attempted robbery at best or abduction at worst. When I was watching the SUV drive off, I surveyed the other apartment windows. They were all dark. I can see every unit except the other 2 corner apartments below me from that vantage point. I think because my apartment sticks out from the building and has many windows, I was targeted because my lights were visibly on and noticeable from the street. However, I don't know how this individual got into the building in the first place, as you would need a key to do so. I've never been so legitimately afraid as a single person living alone. I'm grateful I installed a security chain on my door when I moved in. I'm also so glad that even in my disoriented state, I had the presence of mind not to move from the couch or make any noise. As I recount the event, I can't stop my eyes from watering a bit, though I wouldn't call it crying. My nerves are definitely shot. I don't think I'll be going back to Dreamland anytime soon. I have turned off all the lights save for the lamp by my bed. I usually can't sleep with it on. Tonight, I don't think I could sleep with it off. Case file number 542, written by What Effin' Time? The Boy with Glowing Green Eyes. My sister's mom, we'll call her T, told me a story about a time from when she was little. Maybe 8 or 9. She and her sister, a little bit older than her, were walking home at night as the streetlights came on. They lived in a small town where pretty much everyone knew each other. As they were walking home, a boy, teenager, with glowing green eyes came out from behind a tree and was just staring at them. He had on a gray hoodie. He looked human, but had glowing green eyes. They both noticed, and she said they both just felt very uncomfortable. The boy starts walking towards them, and they start to panic, so they start running. The boy chases them, and he catches up with them and grabs onto T's arm. T and her sister begin struggling with him, and he's just growling the whole time like an animal while squeezing her arm. He even left a bruise. They finally got loose and ran as fast as they could to the nearest business. They ran inside and shut and pulled the glass doors behind them as tight as they could, but instead of pursuing them, he just stopped and turned around. They called their mother to come and get them and told them what happened. They called the police and they began searching for the guy, which she explained he shouldn't have been hard to find because the way the community is set up, there were only so many places he could go. There were woods nearby, but she said if he ran in the woods, he would have been caught because of the dead ends. She said they searched that whole town and he was never found. They even asked around town, this is a close-knit community, if anyone knew who he was, and no one knew him or saw him before. And he was unmistakable. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if anyone has a similar experience or knows who or what this could have been. Case notes, file number 542. Recently I was put onto a new show on Amazon, simply titled Hannah. In it, a girl is raised by her father out in the woods, and he trains her to be self-reliant, strong. Of course, given she never leaves the forest for 16 years, the first time she does, she acts more like an animal from a normal human perspective. She even accidentally harms a boy she meets who was just trying to help her. I was thinking of the introduction of the show while reading this story. The fact he had piercing green eyes could be a coincidence, maybe even related to harsh and limited diet from growing up in the wild, which is what sounds like happened. Or was he something else entirely, not of this world? Bonus file, written by Mystery Chick 88, the decaying maw of a mouth that haunts my dreams. I do not know how she found me or why she hated me, but I will tell you the first time I ever saw her. I was dreaming I had entered into a small country pub. The ceilings were low and it had that musty smell of beer and thyme. Outside the windows was a quiet, rural lane surrounded by hedgerows and what looked like farmers' fields beyond that. It was a lovely warm day, but the scene was eerily quiet. There were 2 sections to the pub, one side which was devoid of anyone and what looked like to be a working bar, and the other side was closed off to the public and looked like it was being used to store old furniture. I found myself wandering around the furniture admiring a beautiful antique writing bureau when I suddenly felt disoriented. My legs started to give way as my head began to spin out of nowhere. My center of gravity was thrown out of whack and I stumbled onto the floor, and a fear I could not explain started to overcome me. I knew something was wrong and I had the feeling of being circled by a predator, one I could not see. In a state of panic, I shuffled back on the floor until my back made contact with something solid, an old dusty chest of drawers, and I tried to calm my breathing, not making any sense of why I felt like I was in so much danger. Then I heard a noise above me, a disturbing, croaky death rattle-like sound. I was terrified, but I found myself slowly raising my head to see what was there. I couldn't help it. I shouldn't have looked, but that macabre sound drew my attention like a moth to flame. Slowly leering over the top of the drawers directly above me, a face came into view looking down over me. It was a woman, strikingly beautiful if not cold-looking. Pale, blonde curls pinned on top of her head, icy blue eyes, young, no more than 30, but her mouth was what was the most terrifying part. It was stretched open into a gaping black hole with torn, cracked flesh stretching even further, making her face a disfigured, warped, horrifying mess. The rattling coming from within that cavernous abyss. I have never felt a fear like it. The sort which strips your brain of any normal function and sends your gut plummeting. I could barely scream. I was that scared. It was more like a high-pitched, hysterical whimper which barely left my mouth as her face came closer. Then I woke up sweating and still trying to scream. As disturbing as the dream was, I thought it was just that, a nightmare, although I have never been able to get her face out of my head all these years later. Roughly 6 weeks later, I had another nightmare in which I was involved in a vicious assault on the street outside my home. In this dream, the police came and I was being pinned to the ground and arrested with the assailants. I noticed a figure walking around the periphery of the circle of police and people. As my face was being pushed into the ground, it was hard to see who it was, but they were getting closer and closer to the tangle of bodies on the floor. As the police pulled me up, I saw it was a crooked old woman, bedraggled and dirty hair hanging in her face. It was full of debris and dirt. She was in an old-fashioned white nightdress. My stomach lurched, and although she looked different, I knew it was the same woman I had encountered in my nightmare weeks before. As if she sensed my realization, she rapidly lurched forward between the police holding me in place and sank her teeth into my arm and disappeared, leaving my arm an immediate septic mess crawling with maggots and decaying. The pain was what woke me up. I bolted upright, expecting to see teeth marks on my forearm as it throbbed, and although there were none there, the area was red as if I had been pinched. I suspected then that these were not ordinary dreams and that she was a separate entity, not some recurring imaginary figure. I didn't know yet that she was a witch, but the more she encroached into my dreams and life, the more I physically saw snippets of her. She had a knack for showing herself two different ways. One, the young beautiful woman, although never again with that hideous deformed mouth, and the other, a stereotypical hag. Every few weeks, I would encounter her in my dreams, which was where I figured out she was a dreamwalker, as I called this gift. Not sure if it's the correct term, a spirit or entity that can manipulate someone's dreams. In another dream, she was standing by my bed. She had her hands around my throat, slowly squeezing until I couldn't breathe. Then I woke up violently, gasping for breath. I had that same experience several times. Another time on my day off of work, I woke up and feeling lazy, decided to lounge in bed a little longer, in and out of sleep, until I became acutely aware of someone very close to me, staring at the back of my head. I knew it was her, and everything inside me screamed, "Do not turn around and look at her." So I stayed still, face pushed into my pillow. And then something peculiar happened. As if I was standing in the corner of my bedroom, I could see everything. Me lying in bed, covered up and face down, and hovering about 2 foot above my body, there was an opaque, brown, swirling humanoid mass. Other times I would dream she was hovering above me, and in a half-sleeping/awake state, too terrified to move, she would reach inside my chest, and I could feel an odd pressure around my heart, squeezing, causing it to beat out of rhythm. All I could do was lay there and pray that I didn't have a heart attack, as the thumping of my heart inside my chest would speed up rapidly and then slow down, so there were seconds between each beat. I tried putting a protection boundary around my home, but it never seemed to keep her out. In the end, my spirit guides shut me down entirely to protect me from her. I guess being psychically open was what kept the link going between us. The complete radio silence I had for 3 years was eerie to say the least, and not something I was used to, as having random spirits popping in and out had been my way of life since I was 11 years old. It did the job. I didn't see her again for 3 years. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I unintentionally started to open up again. I only had 2 more experiences with her after this, although I was disheartened to know she was still linked to me. The night she showed herself again, she entered my dream as usual. I was laying in bed, and in this dream I woke and my quilt was hovering a few feet in the air above me. Through the gap in the dark between myself and the floating quilt, I could see someone shuffling around the edge of my bed, back and forth. The familiar feeling of fear that came with her held me in place, scared crapless out of what she was going to do next. To my absolute horror, the figure climbed underneath the hovering quilt at the foot of the bed and slowly worked its way over my body until she was on top of me and her face in front of mine. Her hair trailed across my skin and she smelt of damp earth. Then she spoke. "You thought I was gone," she hissed at me, and all I could do was try and scream myself awake. Suddenly the quilt dropped back into the bed and I bolted upright, finally awake. My quilt, which I usually cocooned myself inside, was stuffed down on the floor between my bed frame and the wall with the window that looked out into the street. I refused to sleep at my home the next night, telling my friend I couldn't believe she was back after all this time had passed. My last encounter I ever had with her was so odd to say the least, as it seemed as if she couldn't get as close to me as usual. Again in my dream, I awoke and she had me by the throat, both of us dangling in the air over my bed. She was her younger self, porcelain skin, fair hair, and all just staring into my soul as I struggled to breathe. I can't explain the look she had on her face. It wasn't anger, disgust, I don't know. Just a cold indifference to me, with maybe a hint of defeat. I felt different, and although I woke up struggling to breathe and with a sore neck, I don't think she had actually been inside the room with me. It was the last I ever saw of her, and hopefully ever will. I questioned myself early on whether it was a form of sleep paralysis, but I know that it wasn't, because of all the marks on my body. I have never suffered with it before or since, and that explanation just doesn't seem to fit. I suspect she was trying to stop my heart or physically scare me to death, but why? As I said, I saw glimpses of her life. I know she was a healer woman in a small community, but over time, she seemed to get treated with more suspicion and hatred, and shunned out of the area until she was living on the very periphery of society. Maybe once respected, then feared. I have no doubts she was immensely gifted in life, but unfortunately, she has passed over with them same gifts, fully understanding how to manipulate energy. Hands down, one of the few spirits which straight up terrified me. Case file number 543, written by Skyrim Fire Shout. My sister manifesting miracles. My little sister-in-law is 15 years old, and since 4 years ago, when we met, she has been all I can describe it as manifesting. There are always small details, but they happen so often that you can't ignore it. The first time I witnessed it was when our grocery delivery was postponed by 1 day. On the day it was postponed, my sister-in-law came up to me and said, "Wouldn't it be funny if our delivery got postponed again?" 2 minutes later, I got a phone call that their delivery guy had been slow on his route and will be getting ours tomorrow. Another instance was when we had a power cut and she walked by me and asked, "Hey, do you think our power will be out all night?" "I don't know, sister-in-law. We haven't heard anything about it at all." "Well, hopefully it comes back on real soon." And just as my sister-in-law says this, the power comes on as soon as she starts walking away from me. There was a time when we were sitting at the kitchen bench eating breakfast. She was researching chickenpox, and then she said, "Wouldn't it be funny if one of our nieces got chickenpox?" And about a day later, of course without fail, my niece's mom calls and asks my mother-in-law for an at-home itch remedy since niece has chickenpox. Okay, you can clearly see where I'm going with this. There was of course one event that shook me up the most. When I had started dating my significant other about 3 months in, my sister-in-law comes to me and says, "I hope you're still around in 2 years so my brother can name your daughter after me, because I'm special." In the way a child would joke, of course, and that was all it was to me. However, it stuck because of how innocent that statement seemed. I was diagnosed with infertility in my late teens due to chronic bacterial infections. Everyone who has qualified to make that decision came to the same conclusion. If I was to get pregnant, it'd be a miracle. And wouldn't you know, my sister-in-law, of course, wants to defy the odds. 1 week before mine and my significant other's second anniversary, my sister-in-law and I are having a casual conversation in the kitchen when she looks at me and says, "I would hate to be a mom and have to miscarry. That would be so sad. If you were to lose your bubba though, sis, I bet you'd get pregnant again straight away." And right on our anniversary, I find out I'm pregnant, but just like my sister-in-law manifested, I miscarry before I even get to my scheduled ultrasound. Obviously, my heart is broken, but I power through and ask my significant other if we can try for a baby again. The only thing I can do is keep track of my ovulation and hope for the best. It literally only takes us 2.5 months to get pregnant again, and I give birth to a girl to whom my significant other names after his little sister, even though we had disagreed throughout the whole pregnancy on the name. I wanted her to be named after my sister. I will say this to the day I die, there really is something special about her. Or maybe it's just a glitch in the Matrix and she has somehow hacked the system. Take it however you want. It still freaks me out how accurate she can be sometimes. Or maybe how she can manifest miracles. Case notes, file number 543. Your sister-in-law has the tools downloaded into her mind. Like playing an MMO on developer mode, but without realizing you're in developer mode. As you mentioned, being infertile and diagnosed as such by multiple specialists, to get pregnant even once is a miracle, but twice? Any bookie would have taken that bet with 20,000 to 1 odds. I wonder how she feels, though. She must have realized by now that her instincts come true, perhaps only when verbalized? I wonder how often she thinks something and then it happens. If you haven't already, I would ask her more about it if I were you. Learn about this power because it has so many applications to safeguard your family and build a wonderful life, really. And congratulations on the miracle baby girl. Bonus file, written by Big One Tony. She's my daughter, but it's just a dream. I was never a guy that really believed in paranormal situations or anything. But something very strange happened to me this morning, and it still sends shivers down my spine. People may say I'm crazy, and maybe I am, but this is what it felt like to me. I am a 21-year-old with no kids. It's important to know the story. So I went with my dog for a walk this morning, and was about to cross the street when I noticed a girl about my age staring at me from the other street, parallel to the one I was on. I first did not think a lot about it and kept going. Then I saw how she crossed the street to come to the one I was walking on while she was still staring at me. We crossed ways, and when she was closer, I could see her expression, and it was something like pity and nostalgia. It felt like she knew me from somewhere. Well, we crossed paths, but of course I did not stop to stare at her back. I just kept going. Then I turned to look at her once more, and she was still standing on the same spot I walked past her 5 seconds ago, and she was looking straight in my face with the same expression of pity. I continued walking, and after a few seconds, I turned again, and she was still there, staring at me with the exact same expression as the last time I turned back to look at her before I continued my walk with the dog. I don't know why or how, but a thought came directly into my mind, without any previous context. In my head, I was convinced that girl was my daughter, from the future, and she was looking at me that way because I died, and she was missing me. The whole day, I'm still really freaked out by this experience, and I thought about it. Look, my dad died when I was 7, and the night of his death, my mom dreamed he came into her dream and talked to her. He said he's okay and that she doesn't have to be worried about him. What if in my daughter's timeline, I died, and this moment was me in her dream, seeing her for the last time, like my father saw my mother for the last time in her dream? My father seemed to recognize my mother in the dream, and somehow I had that instant thought without previous context that that girl was my daughter. I recognized her instantly. I get shivers down my spine while I'm writing this. Like I said, I never had anything to do with paranormal things. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I never believed in ghosts, but I have no explanation for this. Maybe I am just crazy. I would like to read some opinions. Creepy File number 13, written by What an Effin' Time, the Walmart Voice. When I was about 15, I came out to my mom and we bumped heads so much that she sent me to Las Vegas to live with my dad, whom I've never met before. My dad is a minister and his wife is a pastor. I guess you could say it was her way of conversion therapy? I don't know. My dad and stepmom let me know all the time how much they didn't like me or my lifestyle. I went to church 3 to 4 times a week, and my dad would beat me all the time. He was so angry. I would call my mom and ask her to please bring me back. She wouldn't get me. One day, my dad and I got into a huge argument. He accused me of talking to girls and broke my phone. I had it, so I left. I stayed one night in the apartment complex with some older guy I used to hang out with, but he got weird, so I found some change and found a payphone to call my friend and ask if I could stay at her house. She said it was cool, but she had to sneak me in. I found a way over to her house and ended up getting kicked out because my stepmom called her grandmother looking for me, and her uncle comes upstairs saying he doesn't allow unpleasant word in his home. It was about 9 p.m. at this point. I had no clue where I really was, where I was going, or how I was going to get anywhere, so I just walked. I walked for hours until I found something that looked remotely safe, in my child mind. I found a neighborhood Walmart. I was exhausted. It was around 2 a.m., so I sat at a picnic table in the front and dozed off. I will never forget this voice, but someone screamed, "Wake up." I immediately jumped up and turned around, and there were 2 men about 3 feet away from me. They paused as I looked up at them, trying not to seem frightened. One of them breaks the silence with a weird smile and says, do you know if the store is open?" I was confused and said, "Yes, I think it's 24 hours. They didn't say anything else and just walked away. To this day, I have no idea whose voice that was that said, "Wake up," but I will never forget it. All I can think about is why were 2 men walking up to a sleeping child at 2 to 3 a.m. asking if a store was open they could just walk into, and how it seemed I woke up in just the right amount of time to prevent God knows what. Case file number 544, written by Mystery Chick 88, an eerie, crackling time reset. Let me just clarify before I start. I am completely sound of mind and have not shared this publicly until now, as I couldn't really handle negative comments. I just want some closure, I guess. So here it goes. I have always been into the paranormal as a kid. I was completely fascinated by it, and I found over the years the more open to it you are, the more downright bizarre some of the stuff you experience is. This tops my list of weird experiences. Roughly 4 years ago, my sister came to my flat one night to spend a bit of time with me as we both had been working like crazy and hadn't had the time to catch up. It was just the 2 of us, and she suggested having a game of cards, something we have always done since we were kids. It's a favorite pastime in our house. Once I had gotten the cards out and started shuffling them, she asked me to look at the time on my phone as she had to work the next morning at 7 a.m. and needed to be home in a reasonable time. She had lost her phone on a night out a few days previously, a terrible habit that she has. I told her it was 6:10 in the evening. She replied, "Okay, well, I'll have to be getting off around 8:30, 8:45 to get my uniform washed and dried, so keep an eye on the time for me." I agreed, and we started playing a bit of rummy to start with. Now, we weren't drinking alcohol or taking any drugs. We were just having a relaxed game of cards, chatting about guys and work. The usual stuff, I suppose. Everything was normal. We played cards for what felt like 2 hours easy. I mean, you can't mistake that length of time when you have about 16 to 18 hands of rummy, and we're in the early stages of playing a game of poker, having got bored of the other game. I remember having the weirdest feeling come over me, like the light in my room dimmed, and I distinctly felt an electrical, crackly feeling start in the bottom of my spine and creep all the way up to my skull. I looked at her, and she was looking at me, all wide-eyed and silent, like she knew something was up. I blurted out, "Something is wrong, really very wrong." Without blinking or reacting in any other way, she just says to me, "Look at the time," which I thought was strange. I picked up my phone and looked at the time. A mixture of shock and dread creeps over me. that can't be right. It's not possible. I mumbled out loud, to myself if anything. My phone must have glitched out or something. Getting up to turn the telly on to see what the time is on there. She's looking at me like, what the hell's going on? What is it? What's the time? She asked me again. I just repeat that it can't be right, and as I switch the telly on, the time flashes up in the corner of the screen. It said 6:29 p.m. She sees it and is now just as freaked out as I am. Amy, that can't be right. Did you see your phone say the same time? I told her it did. I pull out a laptop to check the time and even get a watch out of my drawer to see if they all got matched up, and sure enough, they did. We just sat there in a bit of a fog like, what on earth had just happened? We tried to discuss it, but we couldn't make any sense of it. To be honest, it felt uncomfortable. Even to this day, to talk about it, it doesn't feel right. She breaks the silence with a joke, something like, oh well, at least I have another couple of hours to chill with you. We just tried to forget about it. I just wondered if anyone had any ideas as to what it is. Case notes, file number 544. This description you have, how unnerving it felt at the time, like the whole room was crackling with energy, even feeling it in your spine. I felt those words myself reading this. My brain is trying to recreate the scene for myself. A total, all-consuming atmospheric change. Your whole body's senses telling you this is not right. So here's the thing. We know that time travel to the future is not only possible, but we technically do it all the time. Any increase in our velocity, relative to each other or other bodies in the universe, results in our timeline curve stretching more into the spatial category. The way I like to think of it, we have a certain number of balls, and by default, all the balls are placed in the time bucket. That is to say, the default is traveling through space-time purely in the time part. But if we add kinetic energy and start moving through space, changing our inertia, we remove some balls from the time pool and put them into the space pool. Now we're moving more through the space part of space-time. And the more energy we put into moving through space, the more balls we take from the time category. At low kinetic energy states like we live every day, not much happens. Very few balls are removed from the time pool. But put enough energy in and you can, almost, remove all the balls from the time pool, which effectively means that relative to other bodies in the universe, you're barely moving through time. But this really only happens when you get to really quick speeds, like we're talking significant fractions of the speed of light. This can also happen by being close to extreme sources of gravity, like black holes. Think of the movie Interstellar, Miller's Planet. They go down for merely hours and come back to the ship where 23 years had passed. They had removed so many balls from their time bucket, they had barely moved forward in it at all, relative to the rest of the universe. And that relativity part is really what befuddles the brain the most. The fact that the universe doesn't have any absolute time. There is no now everywhere. It's all relative. I honestly still struggle to intuitively incorporate that into my mind, like it doesn't make sense. It does, but it's weird. It's incredibly strange. It's how Einstein felt, no doubt. So how can we all apply this to your glitch? What on earth could have created a reverse effect? Not slowing time for you, but literally emptying the time bucket entirely and somehow adding in negative time to reverse it. I have no theories on that. It would actually violate causality. Now, I will say the classic A word, aliens. We certainly as humans don't have any ability to go back into time, or even a viable theory as to how it could be possible. Yet that happened to you and your sister, so there's no mistaking this for absent-mindedness. I do love glitches like this, where there's more than one witness. It really confirms that something incredible happened. Now, was it aliens, or some freak weather event? I don't know, some effect of the universe that is so rare that it almost never happens? Honestly, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But it is an incredible story. Case file number 545, written by Carlo Sestaro. Airl, the alien. I am 24 years old, and since I was born, I was always interested in the philosophy of the mind, religions, and why they exist. And I always was a rational, scientific person, until when I was 23 years old. Little backstory first. My vision has always been extremely good. Never wore glasses or lenses, always a very visual person. One of those guys who constantly stops to look at trees because, like many of you I'm sure, I recognize the sacredness in everything. I was always quite spiritual after that, without even knowing what the spirit even is. I always felt also that my sessions of free thinking were guided by someone that was not me. Since when I was a kid, I always used my imagination, and I was always interested in the first-person experience, because I feel like the realms of philosophy and religion and science will one day merge. So since I was a kid, I always used my mind for what it is, a viewer. I always felt kind of guided in my thinking. I would see images, concepts, answer to questions I had about society and religion, and so on. I always felt like I knew something else before my birth, but never paid much attention to these thoughts, telling myself they were not real. When I was 21, I finally started to take meditation more seriously, and my exploration into my mind received a great upgrade. At 23 years old, I started to realize that the UFO phenomenon, to which I always felt attracted to, was probably real, and one day I was discussing this with my family at a dinner. Of course, the members of my family were kind of surprised by the subject because they always saw me as a very serious, smart person. And UFOs are for crazy people, right? According to popular belief. So mentally, I told my guides in my mind, I said, if you really exist, and I'm not talking to myself right now, that means you can listen to this. And if you can listen to this, you can show yourself to me. Now, if you do, I will give my life to this cause. If you do not, I will get a family, and I will presume that I should do what my human peers tell me. Materialize on this physical plane so I can see you with my eyes, or the party is over, and I will forget you forever. Next morning, I was up at 4:30 in the morning. I didn't use cannabis the night before, so I was completely sober, no drugs. I went upstairs and made myself a coffee with the intention of working out. I started to walk towards the park, and not even a minute into the walk, I saw my first UFO in my life. It was 5:02 in the morning of the 23rd of September of 2021, and my heart started racing because I knew they were them, my guides. I saw these 4 lights in the sky flying very fast in formation. Then the formation broke and they spiraled among themselves and disappeared one after the others. Extremely fast, extremely close, almost magical. Absolutely no sound at all, and it couldn't be a satellite. I always look up and always know what I'm looking at. After some months of realizations, I asked them in my head to give me the answers of what this place, Earth, is, and they told me mentally. Alien Interview from Roswell Crash, written by Matilda. I didn't know the book or its title before asking, of course. They didn't tell me this with words, but with images. I found the book and read it, and I was floored. I still don't know if these aliens are manipulating us and me, and they're actually enemies, but they are so subtle and they respect our free will so much that they don't give me this impression. It feels like they want to help us all. In the book, they basically told us that we are immortal spiritual beings, and that we are trapped here because we are imprisoned. You cannot kill one like us, you can only trap them. In the book, my favorite quote is, "I sense your disbelief about you being a spiritual being. You want the proof of that? Be above your head now." For the first moment of my life, I realized the obvious. I am not my head or my body. I became aware that Airl, the alien, is an immortal spiritual being, and so are we all. Basically, according to Airl, we cannot remember our past lives because the people controlling Earth make us go towards a light that erases your spiritual awareness. And then on Earth, through mind control and false memories installed by the people we love, they ensure we cannot remember who we are or where we come from. Read the book before dismissing it, as it is written in the preface, what is true for you is true for you. You need to make up your own mind. But I know my own experiences have gone to shape my beliefs. Case file number 546, written by Cabin Bees Triggerer. Thankfully, time spared my job. Preface. I work in a warehouse with a pretty small crew. There's 2 halves of the warehouse. It was 9:15 p.m. when I started working on a truckload that only consisted of products in the back half of the warehouse. I worked for exactly 1 hour, because that's how long the album I listened to was. I decided to take a small break after I finished and checked in with my boss to see how the rest of the work is going. Nobody's at the front, which weirds me out, but maybe they're at lunch? My boss sees me, runs up to me, and demands to know where the hell I've been. I told him I'd been working on the truckload in the back for an hour. He says he checked in the back multiple times to close up and plug in the forklifts and whatnot. He did not see or hear me at all after 9:15. I had been in the empty warehouse for 5 hours. My boss had been about to leave. I checked my phone to find 2 missed calls from my boss. I went to the back to show him that I'd gotten the truckload done. All the lights in the back are off, and the pallet jack I was using was not where I had left it. But the truckload was done. My boss is baffled, and I swear to God I was only working for an hour back there. At least I didn't get fired because he was as freaked out as I was. Case notes, file number 546. There are some incongruities in this time glitch that differ from others, namely that your boss's phone call did register on your phone, 2 of them, and even the messages were left, and the work you did unloading the truck was indeed completed. You even had your playlist go uninterrupted during this time gap, meaning you weren't out of phase with the universe, and yet your boss said he checked multiple times in that same location you were in, but you weren't there. So indeed you physically weren't there, but you weren't out of phase with the universe. That means someone took you somewhere else, physically, in the same dimension. Dare I say, aliens? What other force could be involved to cause time loss, move objects, and disassociate a human from their environment and perception of time passing? To you, of course, it feels like nothing happened at all. 1 hour passed, you did your work, and that's it. If whatever ship took you up was hovering near the ground, your cell service wouldn't have been cut, or at least presumably not, depending on whatever the ship is made out of. Were there any cameras in the warehouse area? I imagine if they exist, that there would be an anomaly around the time you were taken. The cameras probably glitched out. Case file number 547, written by Diabolix. The Lost Road to a Town That Doesn't Exist. Back in the summer of 2011, I was 19 and had relocated my living situation for a few weeks while I was in between apartments. Long story on its own. Due to my relocation, I was pretty far from my work and I'd have to drive about an hour south on Highway 45. At the time, I worked in Spring, Texas, and could get away with a lot of stuff because we were too short-staffed and I was one of the more experienced on our night crew. On my first shift, having to drive to work from this new area, I ended up getting a bit turned around and lost. I was driving on what I thought had been the highway, but after a bend, it suddenly transitioned into a single-lane road, and then further down transitioned to just a dirt road. Ever since it stopped being a highway, there were no areas to turn off. I left my place at around 7 p.m. to arrive at work by 8 p.m. for my shift. This happened around the midway point of the distance, so even though I didn't check the time when it happened, it'd be a fair estimate to say the sudden change in environment happened at approximately 7:30 p.m. Thinking this was really strange, as I'd been up and down 45 a million times and never seen something like this, I figured I would just drive until I reached a rest stop or something to check my location on GPS and turn around at. It got to be a little uneasy when I went a full 20 minutes without a single spot to turn at or turn into, and without seeing a single other car. I saw a bridge coming up and thought, okay, surely there'll be somewhere to turn around up wherever this bridge leads. Then I saw it. You are now entering Adoscodia. At this point, I was just already going to be super late for work no matter what, and figured I'd just send my boss a text and all would be fine. No signal. Figuring, what the hell, I'm gonna get in trouble anyway, may as well check out this place for a few minutes and see where I ended up. It was very unsettling. The town looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Buildings all around looked to be falling apart and in terrible disrepair. Not a single building had a light on, and there were no cars or people anywhere in sight. The roads were a mix of some dirt roads and some normal roads in varying states of decay. Hell, I didn't even see animals anywhere as I drove through. I could tell as I drove that this town was essentially an island. Every direction seemed to have a beach and a bridge that connected it to land, at least from what I was able to see as I drove around a higher elevated area. After about a half hour driving around, unable to find any signs of life, I managed to find my way back to the bridge I came in on and got the hell out of there. When I got to work about 2 hours late, my boss called me back into his office to have a chat. I'd been working there since I was 16 and have never been so much as a single minute late, so he was willing to hear me out. I told him the honest truth of what happened, and he seemed increasingly concerned as my story went on. He and another coworker looked on a map out of curiosity, since they'd never known of any abandoned towns in this area, and found some place called Atascosita, and assumed I'd misread the sign. But when they opened the Google Street View, Atascosita was nothing like the town I'd seen. The only thing they had in common was a sort of similar name and one bridge that connected to it from across a lake, but the town I was in was surrounded by water and had bridges connecting it on each end. I'm only in contact with one coworker who was at work that day, and he's convinced I somehow got a bustling old-style town like Atascosita somehow confused with a long-abandoned ghost town even though they had nothing in common, just because we couldn't find any Atascotia on the map. 2 years after, when I went back to live in Spring for a little while, I did try finding Atascotia again, this time with the intent of filming while there to prove it existed. But alas, no matter how much I retraced my steps, I was never able to find that strange, empty path to the bridge again. I'm typically not super comfortable sharing this story with many people because for obvious reasons, lots of people would probably think I'm crazy because I'm adamant I was in a town that no one can seemingly find any evidence of ever having existed. From the few people who I have told over the years, I've gotten answers like slipping somewhere in time, that I entered some kind of spirit world or something, that I slipped into an alternate reality, and the most common was that I fell asleep on the highway. Though, while that last one certainly sounds like the most grounded on the surface, for those who have driven on 45, I'd have 100% died if I had fallen asleep at the wheel in a late evening or early night on that highway. Accidents are common there, even among totally alert drivers. I'm not sure what to make of it all. As unsettling as the event itself was, the retracing my steps later and not being able to find any trace of it was even more so weird. Honestly, if I ever ended up back there somehow someday, I'd film the whole thing. Atascosita is in a totally different direction from where I'd been driving when all the weirdness happened, but I still wanted to check it out for my own confirmation, and I can definitely 100% state that it wasn't in Atascosita. The only commonality between the two towns is a kinda similar name and nothing else. As for if there were street signs or traffic lights, recognizable brands like a Walmart being present or something, there were street signs, though sadly I no longer recall any of the road names. There were streetlights that weren't working, scattered throughout. I did see buildings that looked like they were gas stations and grocery stores, but none of them had a name on the building. I generally assume this is just from the passage of time. To clarify on a point in the post, the town was in total decay. Many buildings had parts of them that were just straight up falling apart or collapsed, and some buildings looked to have mild damage on some walls or the rooftops. As for the style of architecture, to help everyone have a clearer picture, it was really tough to tell due to the state of the buildings, but the closest approximation I could use is Greek Revival architecture. The designs seemed mostly basic and simple, though there were a handful of buildings that had asymmetrical designs. It's hard to say if this was a result of the buildings falling apart or if it was intentional design. Case file number 548, written by Pi equals 3, The Theft of My Thoughts. I've been trying to explore my philosophical and spiritual side for the past couple of months, but ever since then, weird crap keeps happening to me, what you might call glitches or synchronicities. It became so overwhelming, I seriously thought I was self-inducing mania, hypnosis, or hallucinations. To combat this, I have tried to develop a stronger attention to what I do and think. For example, how my train of thoughts, actions, and memories may have overlapped to result in a cognitive bias and error, as well as any scientific and logical explanations. And 99% of the time, this is usually where the ruminations of glitches end up. But what happened recently defied everything I can think of. I was in the city center on my way home and saw a mature couple as they were leaving a bar. As I walked past, I heard the waitress bid them farewell in Dutch, but the guy mocked her voice and what she said to his girlfriend. From behind, I heard them all laugh and the couple walked, continuing their conversation. It was obviously nothing to worry about, but I thought to myself, that wasn't very nice. As if I would ever have the balls to say something so weak and reactionary about a non-issue to a confident guy in front of his girlfriend. All of a sudden, their conversation cut short. About 5 seconds later, he said, out loud in English, despite just speaking Dutch, "What do you mean that wasn't nice?" I thought it was yet another funny coincidence, and so as if I was continuing the conversation, I thought, it just wasn't. There was a few seconds of pause, and as if on cue, he said even louder, "Tell me how that wasn't nice." Please keep in mind, I live in the Netherlands. Most Dutchies interject English while speaking Dutch, but this was different. He was having a full-on conversation with me. By this point, I was in disbelief. My instincts told me to slowly and calmly look back with just one eye just to make sure he was talking to his girlfriend and not reading my thoughts. And when I turned around, I was horrified. He and his girlfriend were looking straight at me, smiling as if they knew I was going to look. I slowly turned back around and kept walking, pretending like nothing happened. I was growing anxious, and so I took a deep, slow, and silent breath to calm down. I kept breathing in and out, slowly, convincing myself I was just imagining things when he said, "Exactly, you won't tell me," and then started laughing. I have no clue how to explain this. Maybe he just had a string of lucky guesses to just say out loud what I just happened to be thinking. Either way, this wasn't normal. Case notes, file number 548. As you say, it is conceivable this was a coincidence. Perhaps the couple saw you and, being more rambunctious and confrontational for its own sake, decided to pick on you, assuming what you had thought, a sort of self-awareness of their own jerkiness. Still, the fact they knew exactly what you were thinking is unnerving and also spoke in English, which you speak. My gut, though, tells me it was more than mere guesswork on their part. Who knows, really? Perhaps there are more people among us able to read thoughts. But I suspect if this is the case, it would be less of a direct transcription, like in the movie What Women Want with Mel Gibson. That would just be annoying at a certain point. No, it's probably more of an attuned instinct from their subconscious minds, picking up on your own mind's emissions. Bonus file, written by Tom Rummet-Kald, The Possession of Anne. So, I've been back and forth on whether or not to tell this story, mostly because it involves some aspects of my working life that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but also because it had severe personal implications for me. Anyway, I've decided to share it here, and I hope you understand why there are things I simply can't go into detail about. This all started in December 2020. As part of my education, I was scheduled for a 6-month internship at a psychiatric hospital. I had previous experience with working with this type of patient, so I was really excited about it. I switched around the 4 different wards in the hospital, so I treated a lot of different people with lots of different problems. I was curious about all the different aspects, so I never said no to a task, which meant I came across everything from murderers and pedophiles to suicidal teenagers with personality disorders. In my work life, I've had people spit at me, verbally and physically assault me, throw literal crap at me, and all that stuff. So I like to think I'm a pretty tough guy. And besides that, I always carried a personal assault alarm. One press of a button and staff from every ward would be there in a matter of seconds. On one of the wards, I quickly noticed that there was a certain room which was monitored 24/7 by a guard. To be clear, this is a pretty normal procedure, either because a patient is physically abusive, suicidal, or restrained. But most patients get the watch pulled off them relatively quickly. I asked a colleague and she told me it was a female patient, let's just call her Anne, who was extremely aggressive and psychotic beyond belief. At that point, Anne had been restrained to her bed for 3 months. I could not believe what I was hearing. We have really strict procedures when it comes to restraining people with belts. By the way, they're soft belts made of fabric, not leather. So restraining the patient really is the absolute last resort we go to. I asked the chief psychiatrist what was up with this girl, and he just scoffed and said, "If only I knew, but honestly, she defies logic." He told me that they first thought she was psychotic, but her symptoms only got worse no matter how many different medications they tried. They thought she might have suffered a trauma and was in a dissociative state, but that still didn't fit the profile of her symptoms. She had gone from being a perfectly normal woman in her 20s to being violent, extremely aggressive, and unable to speak in just 4 months. That is practically unheard of, especially as no drugs were involved. We regularly administer a toxicology check of all patients, and always when they're admitted. One day, my alarm went off. They're all connected, so I know where I need to run to help my colleagues. I immediately knew it had to be Anne, and I was right. She had only had her legs and torso fixated. Again, normal procedure if the patient otherwise is relatively calm. She had defecated in her hand and thrown it at the guard watching her. She then proceeded to bite her fingers so hard that 3 or 4, I can't remember the exact number, had really bad fractures. Both her hands were a bloody mess, and she needed like 50 stitches afterwards. It wasn't the blood or the fact that she would throw her own filth at us. I had seen that loads of times, but the screams this woman made. It was the most primal, guttural, and terrifying sounds I have ever heard. It scared me, crapless. The best way I can describe it is something like a bear growling and a mountain lion hissing and spitting at the same time. I have seen my fair share of people in primal distress, but I could never have imagined that a person could make sounds like that. As an intern, I am no way allowed to use force, so I was just watching as 7 of my colleagues tried to fixate her fully on the bed. They had serious trouble pinning her down. Reminding you all, these are really experienced people. At last, we called a medicinal alarm, which immediately calls for a chief psychiatrist to make decisions. He decided to forcefully medicate her. They gave her 1 and then a 2nd shot. It only seemed to piss her off, even though it should have put a bear to sleep. At the 3rd injection, she calmed enough so that they could restrain her. She never nodded off. She just breathed heavily and kept staring up at the same corner of the room, sometimes smirking at something only she could see. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was back at the ward. It was a relatively calm weekend, so there really wasn't much to do. Anne was in one of her good periods, so she had her restraints removed. A guard was always by her, though. I was sitting in the office when suddenly I saw Anne walking in the hallway without the guard. I don't know if she had taken a bathroom break or whatever, but he wasn't around. So I catched up with her. I asked her what she was doing in the hallway alone, but of course she didn't respond. I should mention that many of my colleagues were afraid of Anne, and rightfully so, even though everyone is aware that it's the illness and not the person attacking you. But when it keeps happening, that patient does catch some stigma. I, for one, always try to look at the person and not the illness, so I asked where we were going. She took me by the arm and led me to the common area. She went over to a book cabinet, turned and looked at me, and muttered, "Read, book." I was completely taken aback by the fact she was speaking. She pulled out a random book and handed it to me. She then sat down on the floor and started rocking back and forth. I joined her on the floor and started reading the book. It was just some random old book, probably from a charity, and had no special meaning. But as I read, she came closer and closer to me. She then cuddled up to me, put her head on my lap, and fell asleep. One of my colleagues came by, and she looked absolutely shocked. And before I knew it, 5 or 6 people, including the chief psychiatrist, were looking at me reading this random book out there. I got a lot of praise for this, which is always nice. But then, things took a turn for the worse, for me at least. It started one night when I was home alone. It was a completely normal night for me, until I heard something from upstairs coming down the stairs. The best way to describe it is like a big dog thrashing and tumbling down the stairs. You know, like when a dog rushes down the stairs to greet you? But this was bigger, much bigger. I could hear the weight of something tumbling down, while nails or claws or whatever slid on the steps. I got up thinking that somehow there was a massive animal in my house, but there was nothing there. That scared the ever-living crap out of me. I had never had anything like that happen to me. I left the house and stayed the night with my parents. But I also had strange effects on my body, like I had a filter over my eyes or something. Everything started to seem out of focus, like tunnel vision, but with a massive blur added to it. And then I started to disassociate. I had this feeling of being totally out of contact with my body. Then came the panic attacks. My girlfriend called an ambulance one of the times because I was on the verge of a heart attack. The paramedic said I had a heart rate of 240 beats per minute. I have had no prior problems with my psyche, but I figured it was stress. I have suffered from sleep paralysis before, but never with hallucinations or whatever you want to call it. But that started recently. I see a large black mass with long arms and legs sitting in the top corner of our bedroom, like a massive spider, but just with 4 legs. This is now happening on a nightly basis. A couple of days ago, I told my girlfriend about it. She kept pestering me with questions about my nightmares. She said, "That's funny. Every time you're just about to go to sleep, you look up in that corner and you sort of smirk." That reminded me of Anne, and now I'm absolutely terrified that I might have brought something home. Believe it or not, that's up to you. I've never treated a patient like Anne, and none of my colleagues had either. It was scary stuff, properly, and I've never suffered any psychological problems before, never. But something is going on, I'm sure of it. It feels like it wants to get back at me or something. I don't know. And by the way, Anne is much better today. She is in a rehabilitating home where she thrives. One day, she might even be able to have her normal life back. Case file number 549, written by Latte Cosmico. Glitch my name, please. I don't know if this was a glitch, but it's really weird and in some way funny. Premise: I was born and live in Italy. My name is used here, but not like in other countries, and not so frequent that I often see it around. Like if I look for a keychain with my name on it, I never find it. Years ago, I went out on the balcony, which moreover I never do. I don't remember what I wanted to do because I also suffer from vertigo, so it's rare for me to go out there and look. The fear gets to me. I live on the 4th floor. So I went out and I casually looked out of the balcony to see the road, and in that exact moment, I saw a white little van pass by. The classic one often used by companies to transport products, at least in my country. On the van's roof, which I could see clearly from my balcony being high up there was my name in large letters. It was very badly written. It surely wasn't a company sign. Also, it was done with very thick brushstrokes, but at the same time, it didn't even look like a rider tag. The name took up the whole roof of the van, which the person drove smoothly to the end of the road and then left. It's fun to write this now, but how many chances were there that just at the moment I would look out from a balcony that I basically never went to, a van passes with my name written randomly on the roof in huge letters? What happened? Case notes, file number 549. You know, it makes me wonder how many of our choices are heavily influenced by outside forces. Perhaps the developers or moderators of this game we call life drive home subconscious desires when there are events that need to happen, or they believe would benefit us. It's a chain of dominoes effect. Try to quantify the events after you saw your name on that van, a rare name scribbled randomly on the side of a normal white van. It may have led you to question your sanity or assume some greater purpose. Maybe change your belief system altogether. I don't know exactly how it changed you, but I'm sure it did. And you, having your mind altered in that way, made different choices throughout the entirety of the time since then, years now. How many small choices have you made that were different than if you had not seen your name on that van? Maybe you choose caffeinated coffee instead of decaf, leading to an earlier rise in the morning, which leads to you avoiding traffic and making that work meeting that you otherwise would have missed, which led you to getting that promotion you wanted. And on and on and on, and in so many branching paths that I could never possibly even hope to hypothesize over. And all traceable back to this one catalyst. What a thought. Case file number 550. Written by Throwaway 1039-49-532, The Night Walkers. So, I'm a truck driver, and how my job works is I will drive to a halfway point and meet with another driver, and we will switch loads and turn back to go home. Well, Our meeting point is this parking lot in this ghost town. At least I'm assuming, given everything surrounding it is abandoned and no other points of interest nearby for several miles. I've been doing the same thing every night, Monday through Friday, and sometimes we arrive at the same time. Sometimes he waits for me, and sometimes I wait for him. Well, last night I arrived before him and got out to stretch my legs and smoke. This is around 11:40 p.m. While I was standing there, I noticed someone walking up the street. My lights are off and the parking lot is dark, so there's no way to see me, but thanks to lights from the highway, I can see him. I don't want to be seen by him, so I toss my cigarette on the ground and get into my truck slowly, making as little noise as possible. I climb into the back of my sleeper and close the curtains, but look out the window and I see an entire group of people all wearing the same t-shirt walking slowly in a line, but stopping for a second every third step. Possibly 20 or so people in the line. I call the other driver to warn him, and I look through a hole in my curtain as they walk by, and then out the other window to see them just casually walk down the road. Yes, they were walking down the middle of the road. I didn't get out once until the other driver showed up and we swapped and left. This was in Louisiana, about 30 miles from Hammond. Case file number 551, written by Cyanide Life. My dorm, Glitch Haven. I go to a relatively old college, built in the 1800s, and there's a bunch of stories of it being haunted, but I don't really buy into it that much. I've been here a couple years already and haven't seen anything too weird, minus what I'm about to say, which is possibly the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. My roommate is never here. She always just stays at home and commutes to school for classes, which means I basically live alone in my dorm. As an introvert, I could not be happier. After dinner, I usually just go back to my room, lock the door, and work on homework. A few nights ago, I was at my desk working on my paper in the dark and listening to music on my phone. All of a sudden, the music stopped and my laptop switched off on its own. Neither the computer nor my phone would turn back on, like something had just disabled all the electricity in the room. At that point, I kinda just accepted my fate and decided that would be a good stopping point for homework. It was probably after midnight anyway, and the next day was a Saturday, so I didn't need to use my phone to set an alarm. I decided I'd probably just go to bed and let both devices charge. Less than a minute after everything shut off, there was a knock at my door. I remember walking to the door and going to look through the people, but after that I remember nothing. I woke up in my bed the next morning on top of the sheets, which I never do, and I don't even remember going to bed. On top of that, when I checked the door, it was unlocked. I never leave it unlocked, even when I'm in the room. I will check the door 3 times an hour out of paranoia, just to make sure I didn't forget to lock it. I've even turned around halfway to class to see if I remembered to lock the door. I figured it must have been my roommate who came to the room that night, and I was just so tired I didn't remember. So I texted her to tell her she'd forgotten to lock the door last night, but she responded by saying she was never at the apartment. I thought she was lying or something, but then she FaceTimed me and she was in a completely different state. The only 2 people I would have opened the door for were her and campus security, and I have no idea why security would have been at my door past midnight, especially since I was making 0 noise, and no one else has a key, so I would have to be the one to unlock the door. Nothing in my apartment was out of place or missing. I finally assumed that I must have dreamt the whole thing and that I'd somehow unlocked the door in my sleep. My phone and laptop were working fine after all and showed no signs of damage. A couple days later though, I started telling my friend in class what had happened, and as soon as I mentioned that my electronics stopped working, some other girl that I didn't even know butted in and asked, "Was there a knock on your door after?" This girl proceeded to match my story almost exactly. She was alone in her room, all the electricity shut off. There was a knock on her door. She went to check through the people, and she remembers nothing after that. Her only difference is that she woke up on the floor next to her bed and not on top of her bed. She says she also knows someone else that this has happened to, but she won't tell me who. I'm just thinking that if there's 3 of us, this may have happened to a lot more people that we don't know about. Has anyone experienced anything similar? Is there anything I should do about this? I don't think campus security would do anything about it since nothing was stolen. I wasn't hurt or anything, and there aren't even any cameras in the building. Great security plan, I know. They barely do anything about actual crime, so I'm pretty sure I'd get laughed at if I said anything. What was this? And what do I do? Bonus file, written by, it's me, Tazi. The light of my life is gone. When I was about 16, I met my now deceased wife. We were childhood lovers and stuck with each other with relative ease through our teens and adult years. We didn't argue that much, and when we did, it was finished pretty much as quickly as it started. We have 2 kids together, and we were a pretty normal household. My wife was a very spiritual person. She was very much into magic and spirits. She wasn't a loony, just a tad obsessive. Anyways, she passed away 2 years ago due to a lost battle with cancer. It pretty much destroyed me. I felt as though the light of my life was taken away from me. I hadn't experienced that pain in my life often, but when I did, I rarely got over it. Just a few months ago, I started having problems with my sleep. At first, it was little things, waking up in a sweat, having difficulty breathing, waking up and crying, but then it slowly began to get worse. I started seeing my wife in my dreams, and she kept calling out for me. I couldn't move towards her, and I couldn't speak either. I always woke up from these as soon as my wife came close to me. But it didn't stop there. A few days after I started having the dreams, I began seeing my wife's face in reflections of stuff. Like the windows, pots and pans, kitchen utensils, anything that was reflective. It showed her standing behind me, and when it didn't, it showed her standing a few feet behind me, in the corner of the room. During this time, I had my children sent to my parents due to the fact I was on medication and didn't want them to see me going through this. Anyways, I've started hearing from her. Not speak, more like when you think you hear someone call your name, but you're not 100% sure whether you actually heard someone or not. Objects in my room are moved, not by a lot, just by a few centimeters, but I can still tell. It's just one of those things, you know? But yeah, stuff is getting worse. But this can't be my wife, right? Case file number 552, written by Prometheus Titan God. The oppressive weight of destiny. Be careful what you wish for is a term that fits this repetitive recurring lucid dream I had. The first time was 1986 and was persistent till around 1990. I know this because I kept a dream journal, and in the same tattered old notebook, I kept all of my weird experiences too. I also told my closest friends, and at one point, throughout the years, I told a school counselor and a youth pastor. So I had several points of verification of when this occurred. It all started because I was very depressed. I mean, like morbidly depressed. I was contemplating the end. But I didn't like the concept of nothingness, or if religion was correct, it would have meant being a slave in an endless church service, or burning in fire as little red imps stuck me with pitchforks. I wasn't in favor of any of those possible options, so I chose to endure my living hell, where there was at least junk food, my favorite TV shows, and the remote possibility of my life improving. Well, it didn't improve, so one night I begged the universe to help at least a little bit, give me a sign so I can see it's all worth it in the end. Big mistake. This is when the dream started lucidly detailing in a way up to that point I had never experienced before. I saw a very old man sitting in the flickering glow of a television in an otherwise darkened room. He sat deeply within the heavily padded and fairly worn recliner. As I approached him, I noticed he looked familiar at first and couldn't place his face. I said hello, but got no response. He just blankly gazed at the TV in front of him. I was mesmerized by his face. Who is he, I thought. I saw every deep wrinkle. His face didn't show the wear and experience of a man who lived a happy life. He had a face that was the result of frown lines that over decades became deep wrinkles, like his sadness and pain was forever preserved in the folds of his skin. I thought, is this my father in the future? Who at the time was only in his late 30s or early 40s. I saw the clear family resemblance. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was me in the future. I had so many questions. I wanted to know what happened. I know who you are, I said to him, but I still got no response. He just kept his glare locked on the TV. so I turned to the TV to see what he was watching. Okay, I have to remind you, this was 1986, keep that in mind. There was some epic fight between people dressed in obvious modern-looking military uniforms, shooting regular-looking automatic weapons at guys dressed as ancient Egyptian characters, golden and metallic body armor, and these gaudy helmets that look like typical Egyptian mythical beings, similar to King Tut's casket, but with the heads of dogs. But these gold-armored guys had weapons that I thought resembled a wizard's magic staff because it lit up at the end and shot a beam like a laser gun. I instantly understood this was freaking awesome. I totally understood how my future self would get lost in this movie or show he was watching, because I suddenly forgot all my questions I wanted to ask my future self as I too joined him watching it. I watched about 5 minutes of it. I saw that we're on a flying pyramid that was going through hyperspace or warp speed. Then I saw him, my childhood hero with older short hair, and I said, "It's MacGyver! It's MacGyver shooting automatic weapons in space! This is freaking awesome!" Now again, this was 1986. I only knew the actor Richard Dean Anderson as MacGyver, and yes, I did see what later on was Stargate SG-1. But this dream I had, it was 1986. The Stargate movie didn't come out until 1994, and the pilot of SG-1 didn't air until 1996, 10 years later. The other thing I noticed was a station logo in the right corner of the show. It was a symbol of a ringed planet with a rotating number 2 in it, and the words, "Classic," under the symbol. And yes, this is years before the Sci-Fi Channel was even a thing. As far as I know now, there still isn't a sci-fi classic yet, but there are at least 25 or 30 years to go before I look that old. Back to the dream. As I watched the show, I was interrupted by 2 women talking in the back of the room, masked in shadow. I turned and looked at them. I didn't notice them before, or maybe they came in and I didn't notice because I was distracted by freaking MacGyver in a spaceship. This is when the dream goes dark in a super depressing way. The 2 women are nurses or caregivers. One is an older woman who is training a new woman, who at the time looked hot to me. She was about early 20s with dark brown hair. The older woman was talking to her, introducing her to each guest as she referred to them. This part still chokes me up as I write this. Sorry, it's very emotional for me. For the sake of the story and privacy reasons, I call myself Prometheus, as the 2 nurses stood by what looked like a nurse's station, built into a wall that was about 10 feet behind the chair that the old me sat in. The older woman says, "This is Prometheus. He doesn't have much longer. It's important he gets his meds as scheduled, and it's also important not to talk about the following with him or when he can hear you." She handed her a sheet of paper. The new woman asked to read the list. "But you said he doesn't have long. That's on the list of things not to inform him of." The older woman said, "Oh, he can't hear us over here." "Oh," the new woman said, "doesn't he get visitors?" "Not in a very long time. He never married and had no kids. It's the saddest story in this place. That's why he has a list of things not to remind him of. He almost died 4 times because someone wasn't careful. When he first arrived, he was all talkative, but then his only 2 visitors stopped coming. They would be in tears seeing him get worse. Once he realized they weren't coming back, he had a heart attack. He's been silent ever since. He only gets up to watch his shows. He doesn't talk. Don't forget his meds, please." As I looked back at my older self, I saw him looking at me with tears in his eyes. I asked, "Did you hear them?" He said, "No, but you did. And I never forgot when I did, nor what they said. You're here. That means I'm finally free." "I'm so sorry, boy. We deserved better than this. You can't change the end of the story. This is the end of the story. I tried, truly. I did the most I was able to. I tried to get visitors here for the first few months that I don't remember in the dream. Sorry, boy." His eyes went blank and his head dropped as alarms blared. I saw myself die alone, forgotten with the knowledge of a lifetime of unfulfilled dreams and loneliness. I had this dream so many times. Although I could do things slightly different, it was always the same. I tried asking him what went wrong. Hell, I even tried asking for lottery numbers. He kept saying it doesn't matter. I can't change the end of the story. After a few years, it was suggested I asked him about my then friends, what happened with them. So I did just what I shouldn't have. See, I convinced myself it was just a dream until the Stargate movie came out. I remember I got physically ill seeing the same kind of villains. But hey, it wasn't exactly the same as Richard Dean Anderson's, so I kept thinking it was just a dream. I had the dream again, so I asked what happened to friend 1. He said he moved to Florida and died from congestive heart failure over a decade ago. No family, no kids, just like me. Friend 2 moved to Pennsylvania, got married and had a kid who died in a damn convenience store robbery. He tried to be a hero for dumb reasons and the dude shot him a few times over pocket change. Damn idiot. I warned him. Friend 3, that one was harder hit to me. Friend 3 didn't move away. He got married and had 2 kids. He lived in the same area I did. We just felt distant because of something that happened. It's not important. Friend 4. He paused and said, "No, I can't talk about this." I begged him. "You won't change the end, boy." I said maybe not for us, but how about for them? You don't think I thought of that? You don't think I didn't warn friend 2 about the robbery? He either laughed at me or rolled his eyes every time. You know I was so careful not to do anything to friend 3 to make him disappear from my life. He was like a brother. It still happened. Oh, friend 4, I gave everything to. Hell, I thought I actually succeeded. Well, I am 50 now. Decades later, I can safely say after that day when I saw the pilot episode of Stargate SG-1, starring Richard Dean Anderson, I realized I in no way could have just imagined that accuracy in a dream. This was my future. I remember that exact moment, seeing that one episode. It was the exact same episode in every detail as my dream. I broke a little inside. And as for friends, one moved to Florida and had a triple bypass because of a heart problem, and now is in great danger of death from congestive heart failure. I broke a little more. Friend 2 moved to Florida, got married, and had a kid. I just hope he doesn't try to be a hero when that day comes. Friend 3 still lives locally, but because of reasons, we rarely talk anymore. I break even more at the thought of this. Friend 4 got married and had my goddaughter she named after me. I love that girl. She calls me her best buddy. I love her so much. So now I realize something. When I first had visitors as an old man, it was said I had 2 visitors in the beginning. I now realize who they were. I think hell isn't fire and pitchforks. It's knowledge of a destiny impossible to change. I now appreciate every single second with my goddaughter, every hug, every single thing, because I know no matter what, I'll never let her see me waste away dying from old age like that. Oh my god, I just realized something. They don't choose to stop seeing me. I force them to. Case notes, file number 552. This is heavy as hell. Of course, you've thought about this for the better part of half your life, since the dream started. I don't think there's any advice I could offer that you wouldn't have already thought about in all this time. All I can truly say is, I don't think we get but one life. I think it's all a grand game, and the ending doesn't have to be sad. In fact, I think we press on in some way. There are so many potential ways for that to happen. Maybe it's reincarnation. Maybe there's a general heaven afterlife, although I lean towards the notion that life is a simulation. Death, perhaps then, is merely waking up from our high-tech virtual reality pod, ready to go back in as a new character, to experience something uniquely new to us, every single time. As you say though, given we live with unforgiving unknowns, the best you can do is cherish every hug with your goddaughter, every shining moment. They are precious indeed. Case file number 553, written by Milo Farakis. I'm in grave danger. I have a galley-style kitchen. I was washing dishes and my phone was on the counter behind me. I was listening to Mr. Revenant stories. I turned around from the sink to grab another container to wash and noticed my phone had gone from the video to the comment section of the video. I looked closer and noticed that it was queued up to reply to a comment. A message was already written in, but had not been sent. It said, "I'm in danger." All in lowercase like that. My phone automatically autocorrects lowercase I'm to I'm uppercase. It is possible a water droplet from my dish gloves flung onto my phone when I reached it, but I don't think it could type a whole message. After I checked on my husband, I called my mom and texted my brother. Everyone was fine. About a half hour later, when I went back to the kitchen, I was momentarily overcome with nausea and felt sweaty, but it passed after a few minutes. I have no idea what that was. I didn't feel like I was the one in danger. Maybe just a strange, unexplainable glitch and the nausea was unrelated? Or was it a message from someone? But I can't think of who it would be. Any thoughts? Also, I scanned my phone for viruses or malware. I didn't find any. I don't know anyone personally who would want to hack my phone. I'm basically a hermit. I have agoraphobia and work from home. I haven't received any weird texts. I don't have any apps that I didn't download myself from a Play Store. It's still possible, but it seems like my phone wasn't hacked. The next day, I put my phone in the same spot and was washing dishes again while listening to YouTube, and nothing happened. Case notes, file number 553. So this is one of those glitches that makes you question what entities exist that we can't see. You asked if you think the sudden nausea afterwards was a coincidence. It could be, of course, but my gut tells me that something was indeed controlling your phone. We know that spirits can manipulate and even generate EM fields, which our phones use in many ways to function. Could a spirit have typed that? The question then is, why would they? If they're already dead, can spirits experience pain? What kind of a threat could a spirit have? The danger aspect doesn't really add up towards it being a spirit. And if your phone was hacked, why would they type, "I'm in danger," without specifying some way to know who they were or where they were? Or perhaps it was your own message from the future, trying to warn yourself. But nothing I think of here fits perfectly, primarily because the message was so short and incomplete. There's nothing you can really do with it, besides be befuddled. Case file number 554, written by Reese Peace. Milo, the Pitbull. No, Milo, the Beagle? I'm not sure where to even start. This all happened 2 mornings ago. I honestly feel crazy. I can only think of 3 possible situations. 1, my friends and family are playing the most elaborate prank I've ever heard of. 2, I'm going crazy. 3, I woke up in an alternate universe. So for context, I got my dog Milo 4 years ago from my cousin. He was a 1-year-old Pitbull at the time. When I got him, my girlfriend was worried because we have a 1-bedroom apartment and she thought a Pitbull may be too large for our apartment. So Friday morning, I got out of bed to feed Milo and take him for a walk. I go into my kitchen and there is sitting a dog I don't recognize. It's a smallish Beagle, and I've literally never seen it before and have no idea whose dog it is. My mind starts racing because I'm not sure how it could have gotten into my apartment. My first thought is that my girlfriend must be sitting a dog. She works the 3rd shift from 1 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. I go to bed around 10 p.m. every night, so I was assuming I went to bed and one of her friends must have asked her to watch their dog. I sent her a text asking whose dog it is. I decided I'll walk Milo and this dog separately because I've never had to walk 2 dogs at once. I go to the bathroom to find Milo because that's the only place he could be hanging out. I walk into the bathroom and it's empty. I call for him, and here comes the Beagle? I'm confused, but again, I assume my girlfriend must have something to do with this. Maybe she took Milo somewhere and didn't go to work and didn't get a chance to tell me. At this time, I noticed the dog has a collar with a name tag. I reach down to read it and my stomach drops. It says Milo. I was kind of freaked out, but I honestly thought it was a coincidence. I text my girlfriend again and ask where she and Milo are, and that I'm going to take this dog for a walk and look for Milo. I go out and I'm looking everywhere in the neighborhood for Milo. I was really worked up and didn't notice I had some missed messages from my girlfriend. They basically say she has no idea what I'm talking about and freaking out about where Milo is. As I go to respond, I see her pull into our neighborhood. She parks and jumps out of the car and runs up to the Beagle crying and saying, "I thought he was gone. Where'd you find him?" I ask what she means and she says you said Milo was gone. And I said yes, he is. And she gets this weird look on her face and asks if this was some corny prank. We watch YouTube prank couples a lot. I start crying from frustration and tell her, no, Milo is really missing. I tell her how I woke up to this dog and that Milo was just gone. She still thinks I'm messing with her and says that she doesn't understand the prank and kind of gets annoyed and starts to take the dog inside. She tells me my prank was stupid and didn't work. I start getting mad and telling her this isn't a prank and that Milo is really gone, and she screams, "No the hell he isn't. He's right here. What are you even talking about?" Something about how serious she was completely devastated me, and everything just kind of clicked that this dog was really Milo. I start freaking the hell out and telling her that Milo is a Pitbull and that I don't know what the hell is going on. I pull out my phone to get pictures of Pitbull Milo, and everything is gone. No photos of Milo at all. There's just a mix of pictures I remember and ones that I don't. There's pictures of this Beagle Milo on my phone though. I start having a panic attack. I call my mom. She has no idea what I'm calling about. I message my friends in our Snapchat group chat. They're clueless as well. I call my cousin that knows Milo, and she tells me that he's definitely a Beagle. I don't know what's going on. Milo was 100% a Pitbull. My city doesn't let Pitbulls at the dog park, so we've never even been. This is something I talk to my girlfriend about a lot. How would I have memories like that? My family thinks I'm joking. Meanwhile, my girlfriend wants me to go to the doctor. I feel like I'm going insane, and I can't stop crying because I want Milo back, and if I'm in some other timeline, I'm afraid to find out what else is different. One thing that I've noticed is that anyone I bring this up with has a bad reaction to me mentioning an alternate timeline. They get visibly upset. I'm so lost, y'all. I'm writing this more for documentation than anything. So in case I wake up tomorrow and everything's normal, maybe this post will still be here for me to show my friends and family. If anyone has any idea what caused this, please let me know. Case file number 555, written by Drink Beer and Fight, The Universe's Mr. K. I run a custom trim shop / hardwood lumberyard. Both glitches involve long-time customers, guys who I know on site. The first time it happened was around 2010. We had a few contractors who did enough business with us that they had accounts. They could just sign for material rather than usual payment on delivery model. I'm not saying all contractors are shady, but there are a lot of fly-by-the-night guys who say they'll pay when the jobs are done, but you never hear from them again. I get that not everyone has the capital to lay out for material, but I've been burned enough to know the difference between an established business and the cash-on-delivery guys. Anyway, call this customer Mr. C. One day, Mr. C comes in and his left hand is heavily bandaged. Obviously, I asked what happened. Mr. C was cutting a piece of plywood on a table saw by himself. Halfway through, it started to fall off the table. He put his hand down to push it back onto the table, and it sliced the top of his middle finger, half of his ring finger, and all of his pinky finger off. We talked about it and agreed how table saws are the most dangerous tools. I actually know more guys who've been injured from nail guns, but I was being sympathetic. Anyway, I didn't see Mr. C for 5 or 6 weeks. I saw he had an order ready for pickup one day and made sure I was in the shop. I wanted to say hi and check on how he was holding up after his accident. When I walked up to the loading dock, Mr. C and one of our employees were loading red oak baseboards into his box van. Mr. C was using both hands, both fully fingered hands. I didn't say anything. I just helped them load the material into the van and made sure the paperwork was in order. After he pulled out, I said something to my employee about how I thought Mr. C had cut his fingers from his left hand. My employee just looked at me weird and said he didn't know what I was talking about. This employee knew about Mr. C's accident. He was there the day Mr. C showed up in bandages. I know that we discussed it and nail guns. No one in the shop knew what I was talking about, so I let it go. Mr. C officially retired a few years ago with all of his fingers. My second glitch actually had a witness. July 2018, I was eating lunch in the break room with one of our older employees. We weren't talking, just eating our microwave leftovers and staring at our phones. He grunts and says, "Mr. K died." I was taken aback and he showed me the obituary. Mr. K had been killed in an automobile accident the previous weekend. Arrangements were scheduled at the local funeral home on Friday. I felt bad that I couldn't go to the calling hours. Mr. K had been a friend of my grandpa's. They were both carpenters. My kid had friends coming for a sleepover that night, and I wasn't going to cancel it to go to calling hours for a guy I really didn't know. My dad was going anyway, so our family was still represented. Fast forward to January 2019. That same employee walks into the office and says he has a customer that requires my assistance. That's a usual code for, here's a Karen that we don't want to deal with. I walk out to the warehouse, and standing there is Mr. K. Longtime employee walks behind Mr. K, looking at me with his eyebrows raised so high they are disappearing into his ball cap. I was stunned. I greeted him, shook his hand. I asked him how he's been doing. He said he's been fine. We found the couple of boards he needed for his project. He paid and was on his way. As he was pulling out, my employee said, "I swear I thought he was dead." Amazed that I wasn't the only one this time, I agreed. We talked for a while about how we both remember reading the obituary. I went back to the office and called my dad. I asked him if Mr. K was alive. He said he hadn't heard otherwise. Dad didn't remember going to a funeral. I've only talked to my employee about it one other time. We just chalked it up to an oddity, but it still weirds me out. Case file number 556, written by Jenny Puff, a Culinary Armament, Dematerialized. I accidentally dropped my favorite knife. I dropped it into a box I use for light repairs. It's a regular box, a reused Amazon box, 9-inch deep, and I watched it sink down into my stuff, so I stuck my hand in the box trying to reach after it, barely grazing it with my fingers. But it kept sinking further and further, and then finally I felt the bottom of the cardboard box. I took the box and poured out all the contents looking for my knife. I looked all over and opened everything up and I couldn't find it at all. So then I looked all around the box. I moved furniture around. I even poured the box out again a second time, but there wasn't anything there. Every now and then, I pour out everything from that box and try looking for it again, but it never turns up, and it sucks so much because I saw it, I felt it. Then suddenly, I didn't anymore. I feel like it just poofed from existence. Ugh, it was my favorite knife too. I can't get it again because it was from a Fry's Black Friday sale, and Fry's doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, I wish I could tell my parents, but they'll just say I lost it because I sometimes misplace things, but this wasn't that. Case notes, file number 556. So another DOP, disappearing object phenomena. Can't get enough of these glitches because they match with my own. The good news for you, there's a decent chance your object will return. Mine haven't, but hey, mine were just tennis balls, so I'm not too shaken up about that. I hope your beautiful knife does come back. That is, unless the mechanical elves on the other side dimension decide, hey, this is a great knife, I think I'll keep it. I mean, they must need to cook too, right? What kind of dishes do extra-dimensional entities eat? Nothing too appetizing, I'm sure. Although I'm not a very adventurous eater, I stick with what I know, mostly Subway. And pizza. Although, never told anyone this, I get pizza without cheese. I'm a heretic. Bonus file, written by Apart Cardiologist 54, the ghost car on our lawn. This has happened several times at this point. It started about 16 months ago when I was cleaning my house around 12 a.m. My husband, boyfriend at the time, worked nights, so I had adjusted to his schedule. I usually kept the blinds open during the day and would go around closing them at night while I tidied up before bed. Our room was my last stop on the first night this happened. The curtains and blinds were open as I was sweeping the floor when I felt the sensation of being watched. I looked around me when my eyes focused on the silver sedan parked outside my house, mostly in the grass on my front lawn. Now for context, my bedroom window is about 15 yards from the road in front of my house. It's a small front yard in a pretty decently populated neighborhood. Anyway, I saw the car before I saw her or him. I'm not sure, but there was clearly someone sitting in the driver's seat of the car and another person standing about 5 yards from my window, clearly staring at me. The only reason I could see this is because the moon was fairly bright tonight. I shrieked and dropped to the floor and crawled to the light switch to turn it off so I couldn't be seen. I called my husband to ask him what I should do, and he told me to call the cops. Duh. I did, and of course, by the time they got there, the car was gone. They asked if they could see my security footage, and I agreed. but the footage from that section of time was just gone. It skipped over the few minutes that they would have been outside. This has happened several times since then, and I've completely given up on calling the police as I feel they'll think I'm crazy. I have no proof that this is happening, but I would like to have some opinions as to what they may be doing. In the past 16 months, it's happened probably 10 times. Sometimes the person is standing in the yard, and sometimes they aren't. Also, the car has been different every single time, but the light is always on inside the cabin of the vehicle when I go to look. The people inside are never looking where I can see their faces. I'll run to grab my phone to call someone, but they will already be gone. I went into our guest bathroom, which is the only one downstairs besides the one in our master bedroom. It's located in a corner hallway next to the 2 spare rooms in the house, currently his office and our son's room. I went inside and quickly did my business. I don't like being alone, for obvious reasons I feel, and started to wash my hands. The sink is right next to the door. While I was drying my hands, I heard and saw the shadow under the door. Someone run up to the door, stop, turn around, and run into one of the adjacent rooms. I figured it was my husband ready to start the game again and ripped open the door. I fully searched each one of the rooms and didn't find anyone, which I should have if it was him. There was no time for him to run by the time whatever was moved from the door and I opened it, and I clearly saw the shadow go right towards the rooms and not left towards the living room. The second thing that happened was while my husband and I were playing pool, which is right next to our front door. Right after we broke, we heard a loud knock at the front door. We looked at each other, obviously confused as it was pretty late at night. We both went to the door and answered it. There was no one there, and we both stepped out onto the porch to take a look around. We stayed out there for about 30 seconds or so to take a look around and headed back in when we saw nothing. We were both shocked to see that the pool balls were in a straight line down the center of the pool table. It was very shocking since, as I mentioned, we had just broken and the pool balls were scattered when we exited. The third and most recent thing that has happened was when I was alone in the house. Shocker. I was sweeping the steps and some of the plaster-like stuff on the ceiling had started to flake off and make a huge mess. I was cleaning up the landing at the top of the steps when I started mouthing off at the energy that I felt around me. I felt unwelcome in my own home, and that pissed me off. I know I shouldn't have said the things I did, but I was pissed as it's my house. I don't write what I said here, as I still live in this home and don't want to put those words back into existence, and you'll see why. There are 3 rooms up the stairs, and all 3 doors were closed during this time. Once I started getting really belligerent, all 3 doors started to shake violently in the door frames. It was as if there was someone behind each of them just shaking and banging them against the frames. I immediately started having a panic attack and sank to the floor. I screamed out for whatever it was to stop and that I was sorry, and surprisingly, it did. I bolted down the stairs to find my phone and call my husband. As I was about halfway down, I felt a hard and violent shove on the center of my back that almost caused me to tumble down the remainder of the steps. My husband has never felt threatened in our home, but I constantly feel it, even before I made all those comments. And this all happened before the car started showing up, and they were all several months apart. Case file number 557, written by 333 Visions. An entity in my living room. This happened over 10 years ago, when I was about 17 or 18 years old. My older brother and I were both living with our parents at the time, and it was only 4 of us that lived in the house. I came home a little late one night and was greeted by a locked front door. I had no house key to get in, and I didn't want to wake my parents up as they'd be irritated to say the least. So I decided to walk around back to see if the back doors happened to be unlocked. Our house was a L-shaped home with 1 window in the living room on what would be the bottom of the L, and double doors around back that led into the living room. As I went along the side of the house, bottom of the L, I noticed the living room light was on, and I looked through the window to see if anyone was in there. It was my brother. The back of his head was facing towards me. He was sitting in his usual position watching TV, kind of half sitting, half laying down on the couch. I thought, sweet, I'll just walk around to the back and knock on the doors to let me in. As I got to the back of the house, where the doors were, I was met with no TV or lights on in the living room. I thought it was kind of odd, but maybe he shut everything off and went to bed in that 5-second span of me walking around back. That would be fast. So I pulled out my phone and called him, which he answered, and I asked if he could let me in. He said, "I'm not home, I'm at the bar right now." My heart sank into my stomach and I got goosebumps to the core. I told him I just saw him in the living room through the window. We both got freaked out and I ended up waiting for him to get home before going inside. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. We still talk about it quite often and we simply have no explanation for what happened that night. If you're wondering, could it not have been my dad? They have a different hair color, brown and blonde, respectively, and completely different builds, and I was not under the influence of any substance to mistake them. Case file number 558, written by KSN Chusnan. I crashed my snowmobile into another universe. In February 2020, I was snowmobiling for the first time. My boyfriend at the time was driving all day and finally let me drive at the end of the trip. We had been dating for 2 months and this was our first trip together. I'm going around the last bend and I accidentally floor the snowmobile instead of pushing the brake. I go flying off a cliff and end up 50 feet down. The snowmobile is on top of me, upside down, still running with the bottom part spinning. My helmet has flown off and my head is 1 inch from a tree. I'm terrified. My boyfriend managed to roll off the back at the last minute and is trying to save me, but the snow is really deep and he's having a hard time getting down the steep cliff. My legs are fully submerged in snow with the snowmobile on top, and I'm not sure if I'm paralyzed. He calls for help and all these men run down to save me. When they finally pull me out, I can stand and it's the happiest moment of my life. I'm not paralyzed. I don't have so much as a scratch on me. Do I have a concussion? Maybe. It's hard to say. The snowmobile also miraculously has minimal damage, only the little plastic windshield part is cracked. In hindsight, this moment is where everything changed for me. But you have to understand, I didn't piece this together and come to this realization until months later. These are the differences in my life. There was suddenly a pandemic. Everything was shut down within a few days. In my old timeline, there was a virus going around, but it had only impacted a few people and was similar to the flu, nothing concerning. I had a different job. At the time, I chalked it up to the pandemic. We were on the trip because I was about to start a new job. I had signed the contract and I knew what the role entailed. I was going to start the Monday after, but after the crash, I couldn't get a hold of my new boss for 9 months, and he finally told me I got the job in November, even though I had accepted it in February. He also comments how I've never been into the office, when in fact he gave me a tour in January of 2020, and we spent the day together. The role I'm in is completely different than the papers I signed. My loving, awesome boyfriend was now physically abusive for the first time that night. He blacked out and attacked me, choking me. He was crying the next day, and nothing like this has ever happened before. I thought he was traumatized from the crash and let it go. That was another thing that was different. I would have never let that go before. I come from a loving childhood where my dad was my best friend always. I would have never put up with that before the crash and was shocked that I did. In the old timeline, I was on a low dose of Effexor, Xanax, and blood pressure medication. I don't take any medication at all in this timeline. Over the next year, a series of weird things that don't make any sense keep happening to the point I start to feel suspicious. I suddenly have an incurable disease I didn't have before. I'm in pictures I have no idea what the context is. I'm wearing clothes I don't own anymore. My friends have memories of me I don't share, and I'm getting more and more depressed. The boyfriend keeps physically abusing me, and I can't get out of it. It's as if my own will evaporated away. I just keep thinking, this can't be my life. This isn't my life. It just felt like I wasn't supposed to be here, and I finally look at Reddit and realize that I died in the snowmobile crash, and that this is an alternate universe I'm in. I start to just agree with friends when they say, "Remember when you said this and that? And we went here and did this." But in truth, I have no recollection. Also, my CAT scans are normal at this point after visiting the ER. To be honest, I wasn't the most observant person to begin with. A new couch could be in the living room for days and I wouldn't notice. So when all the stores and shops are different in one area of town, I don't know if that was always there or new. I finally worked up the nerve to tell my sister, who is surprisingly supportive. She asked what else is different. There was this song in the other timeline. It was a very popular song by a Shania Twain or Sheryl Crow type. Anyone would know it. I sing it to her with the lyrics and tell her we always used to listen to it growing up. She has no recollection of it. I typed the words into Google. The song doesn't exist here. The longer I'm in this timeline, the more I forget the words and melody of the old song. Also, there was no iPhone 13 in the other timeline because Steve Jobs was superstitious and it was supposed to go from iPhone 12 to iPhone 14. I notice little glitches like that are stupid and don't really matter. How do I feel about it now? I've accepted my new reality. I feel bad for my sister and parents in the old timeline that they're dealing with my death in a freak snowmobile accident, but there's nothing I can do. Trying to find them again would be like trying to walk from Canada to Australia with no map, impossible, and a waste of time, and also a drowning. I'm just making my reality the best I can now. It clearly, for some reason, wasn't my time to die. I mean to the point of going to the afterlife, if there is one. So I should do something important if I can. I was always agnostic before this, but didn't believe in different timelines. I thought movies like The Butterfly Effect and Run, Lola, Run were dumb concepts. Now I don't rule anything out ever. About my iPhone. Jobs died in 2011 in the old timeline as well, but he had planned out the designs for the phones way past when he died because he knew he had cancer. He had an elaborate release plan of the phones in the future. Did he not hear? And yes, he designed them so that the iPhone 13 would be skipped because he was superstitious. Have I been to therapy? Yes, I've been to multiple therapists, psychiatrists, counselors. I can't find any evidence of the effects or prescription I had, and I don't know who would have prescribed it. The bottles were just gone. I don't rule out that I bumped my head and some bad crap happened to the world after that. This is just my theory. I see a lot of people saying, "I want to believe you," but I mean really, that's your choice. It doesn't impact me either way. I just wanted to share my story. Case notes, file number 558. A few interesting points here regarding your quantum immortality experience. The first is how you feel as if you yourself have changed. I have never heard of this happening, but it would make some sense. One common question I've had posed to me is, what happens to the consciousness that is taken over when we die in one universe and our sentience is transposed into another us in a different universe? Presumably the us in that new universe was already occupied. So do we erase the consciousness already there? Personally, I think it's nothing so dark. I think an automatic blending occurs. Your personality then changed precisely because you merged with the one that was the you in this universe. I think this isn't reported on often because most people jump into a universe very nearly identical to their past one, with usually just minimal cosmetic changes like their loved one having a different haircut or something like that. But you, this new universe is radically different. A pandemic, a different job, your boyfriend is abusive, etc. So the you in this universe was significantly different from the you in the first universe. Thus, the blending had more notable effects, such as you tolerating things you would never have tolerated before. I still believe in free will though, so while your personality may be influenced, you can still focus hard to make the choices you want to make. I think you'll be okay. Case file number 559, written by Broxy Losky Tuxky. Do you want to ride from an alien? So about 2 years ago, I would walk to and from high school. I only live around 4 blocks away, so it was a brisk walk to and from. I live in a safe neighborhood in the middle of a desirable school district. I know all of my neighbors, even the ones down the block, and recognize everyone on my walk to and from. That's why this shook me up so much. I was walking back home from school one afternoon. when a yellow car pulled up just a few feet behind me. I didn't think anything of it and kept walking, yet they honked at me. I turned around and looked at the car, and I vaguely recognized the people inside. There was a driver and 2 kids my age in the back. The driver looked similar to my homeroom teacher, and the 2 kids looked similar to 2 twins who are in my grade. I felt as if something was telling me to keep walking and ignore them, but like a horror movie protagonist, curiosity got the best of me, and I walked over to the car. When I got closer, I noticed details about the people in the car that seemed off. For one, they looked eerily similar to the people I knew from school, yet each one had a few details that made them unrecognizable. It felt like the uncanny valley effect. I can't really explain it well unless you know the people in person, but it was like someone had a police sketch of them made, ultra realistic, if that makes sense. When I got to the passenger window, the woman said, "Do you know these 2 from school?" And I just said, yeah, I think so. And she nodded and asked if I needed a ride home. I told her my dad would pick me up a block down from here. She asked if I needed a ride down the block, and I told her I would be fine. I felt the worst kind of vomit-inducing dread when the woman talked to me, and it didn't help me that the 2 girls were dead silent in the back the entire conversation. She told me to have a good day, and as I walked away, she honked at me again. I whipped my head around, completely freaked out, and she just smiled and waved at me. I booked it home after that, locked my doors, and waited for my dad and sisters to get home. When they did, I told them what happened. My dad was nonchalant about it, telling me to not walk up to cars next time. My sister, on the other hand, was super freaked out, and even now doesn't want me to bring it up. My friends think that I met some weird doppelgangers, and I kind of agree. 2 years later, and I can still remember this. It just weirds me out. Case file number 560. Written by Drums is Life. The Rainbow UFO. I live on some property on the edge of Bryan, Texas, and I saw something strange about a week or 2 ago. I hesitated to post it anywhere or tell anyone besides my girlfriend, who I was on the phone with at the time. It was about 10 p.m. on a weeknight, and I was following my usual nightly routine of walking my dog down the half-mile-long gravel road from my house to the highway and back to check the mail. The road curves about a quarter way down, and it's a straight shot to the highway from there. As I rounded the curve, I noticed a large orb that was pulsating color and flickering throughout all the colors of the rainbow. It seemed to be hovering in the air, like at about the height of a helicopter. It was very similar in appearance to the star Sirius when it's low in the sky, like how it flickers and changes colors, but it was much, much bigger. At first, I actually thought I was looking at Sirius, and it was somehow appearing huge, like how the moon looks huge when it's on the horizon, but I could actually see Sirius itself over to the left. I couldn't tell exactly how far away it was, but it was about the relative size of like if you held a quarter at arm's length, if that makes sense. It wasn't moving at all, just sitting there in the air, and it made no noise. I had been on the phone with my girlfriend, and I described to her what I was seeing as I watched it for about 30 seconds. I then thought I heard a coyote or some other animal a little behind me, so I turned around to shine my flashlight and make sure there wasn't anything immediately around me. I had only looked away for about 3 seconds, but when I looked back at the orb, it had completely disappeared. I have no idea what this orb could be. I don't think it could have been a helicopter or plane, because I've never seen one flash rainbow colors like that, sit completely still like that, or make zero noise. I live in a dead quiet area, and I always hear helicopters and planes well before I see them. I also don't think it was a drone, because it was way too big to be a drone. Drones make a very specific noise, impossible to mistake for anything else. It was the opposite direction from the town center and the nearby Texas A&M campus, so I don't think it could have been anyone shooting anything off from their backyard or something like that. I don't even know anything that anyone could shoot off or fly that would look like that. I sat on this sighting for a while, not knowing if I should tell anyone or who to even tell, but it's perplexed me for a while now, and I'm ready to share to all who will listen. Case notes, file number 560. This would be my first telling of a rainbow-style UFO. Fascinating. Makes me think of something simple but obvious, What if the aliens who are here observing us are constantly trying to perfect or improve their own technology? Just because they're more advanced than us doesn't mean the tech they have is perfect, that it can never be improved. Perhaps they've managed to improve their tech, but as such, the light it emits, instead of just orbs that are one specific color, they rotate for some reason. I also know, given the tech they have, whenever they're seen, it's because they want to be seen, either to further societal discourse or for specific individuals. I think it's more likely the former. Think about it. If we had ships that could travel between solar systems, and we found a planet with complex sentient life such as ourselves, would we immediately introduce ourselves? Of course not. Outside of concepts like Star Trek's Prime Directive, assuming we don't develop something along those lines, but that we do want to make introductions with lower species, how would we do it? I think very slowly, carefully. It's that old adage that people just aren't ready to accept the truth. So make your ship known locally to a small number of people over years and even decades. Introduce the very concept into culture. Maybe even deal with governments to do this. Well, that's how I would do it. Case file number 561, written by Control-Alt-Mayo. Going off script is wrecking my life. I saw an old video somewhere on YouTube about how we unconsciously have scripts ready to say during conversations with people and how we go about our daily lives. Like that weird feeling we get when we just have to say something? People say if you choose not to say anything during the conversation or choose not to do the specific action set out for your person to do it, it could create consequences or glitches to occur. I personally didn't believe this at first and thought it was just something to scare people, but I wanted to try it out and see if anything weird does happen. So one day, while I was in the living room, seated beside my younger brother who's around 10, just scrolling through my phone, he suddenly started talking about Fortnite and the new update. I wasn't really tuned into the conversation, but just kept agreeing. At one point during the conversation, it switched to talking about stars and the galaxy, since science was one of his favorite subjects. I suddenly remembered about the concept of each of us having our own scripts in the conversation, so I decided to test it out. My little brother would often ask me questions about science, since it was my strong suit at school. Sometimes I would just say random BS or an actual well-known fact. So when he asked me what the difference between seeing a planet in the sky and a star in the sky, I stayed quiet. For the first few seconds, it was just silence as he was waiting for the answer. I already had the answer, which was, stars blink and planets don't, in my head, but I chose not to say it. I got up from my seat and told him I was going to make Milo for myself. Suddenly, as I got up, he said, "Aren't you supposed to say stars blink and planets don't?" I turned around and said, "What? That's what you're supposed to say. Why didn't you say it?" At that point, I kinda got freaked out because that was word for word the answer in my mind. Keep in mind, he's just 10 years old. I told him, "How did you know what I was going to say?" "That's what they said." That freaked me out even more, because he could have just said he searched it on Google or something, so that's why he knows. I asked who they were, and it was like something out of a movie, because he suddenly looked at me, confused, and said, "I don't know either," also leaving him confused. The other incident was another day. My parents set up this foldable pool outside in our lawn. My little brother was again involved alongside my parents. My brother was swimming in the pool, and I could hear him from inside the house since the door was open. I had this urge in the back of my mind to go outside to him, but I fought against the script and made my way upstairs instead. I hear him suddenly scream, so I ran outside and saw that he hit his head on the metal pole of the side of the pool. Then he said, while laughing, "I thought you'd be standing there." My mom even laughed as well and stood on the corner where my brother hit his head on the pole and said, "You were supposed to stand right here." At that time, I didn't even bother questioning them about what they just said, because they'll just say that they don't know again. So I just laughed and went back up to my room. Basically, what I noticed was that going off the script doesn't really show much of a glitch in the Matrix, but more of other people saying weird things and them not understanding what they just said. I honestly think it's just their subconscious not understanding how to go about their scripts, since I didn't do it the way I was scripted to, so they just say weird things, feeling uncomfortable. However, one thing I did notice was my life gradually becoming worse as the days passed after going off script. Examples are my door, which was just brand new, suddenly breaking off as I opened it, more loud ringing in my ears at the most random times. I have tinnitus, so I actually know what normal ear ringing sounds like for me, and other stuff in my room specifically just breaking or disappearing from existence. There are more experiences with the going off script thing, but there's my weird experiences with glitches. If you want to try doing what I did and going off the script, it's just basically you going against your gut feeling during a situation, doing a completely random course of action you would never do, or holding back a reply during a conversation. Case file number 562, written by Josh T. 123. My sister vanished from a locked room. We were at a hotel celebrating my dad's birthday. We were exiting the pool and walking back to my dad's room to eat pizza that we had ordered. I was just a few steps behind my sister and her daughter. I watched her walk into a room and, being just a few steps behind her, I didn't feel like I was confused about where she was going. Yet, when I turned to enter the room, I noticed that it said, meeting room. I thought, that's strange. They rented the meeting room so we could eat pizza? I tried to open the room. It was, not surprisingly, locked. It didn't make any sense for us to have the meeting room anyway. So I walked to my dad's room, which was 3 doors, approximately 20 to 30 feet away, and there she was. The obvious answer is that I was mistaken and simply went to the wrong room. But I don't feel like there's any way I could have made this mistake on my own. I was literally just 10 feet or so behind her. I wasn't distracted. My eyes were on her the entire time. I watched her walk in and then tried to follow her into a locked room. Case file number 563, written by Anonymous. I faceplanted into snow that didn't exist. I'm used to weird things happening in my life. So when this happened, I just thought of it as one of those things. But looking back on it, it's actually really odd. This was about 1 month ago. My brother was moving colleges because he didn't like the one he was at. So we had to get all of his crap into our car and drive to the other college about 3 hours away. On our way to the other college, we stopped at a rest stop. It was snowing outside, with snow piling up on the ground and the building itself, and even on the steps leading up to the rest stop. There were only about 6 steps, but they were really long ones. Each step had enough room to walk a little on, you know what I mean? But they were kind of hard to see because of the amount of snow on them, and the hill was parallel to the steps. Only thing signaling there were even worse stairs there was a railing. Long story short, I missed a step, making me trip and fall flat on my face in the snow. I quickly got up, and there was no snow at all, anywhere. It wasn't even snowing anymore, and there was no snow that I faceplanted in, even though my face was still cold from it. All the snow on the hill, the building, the steps, snow falling from the sky, was gone. Because I was in front of my family, leading the way to the rest stop, they all saw me fall and rushed to see if I was okay, and I was, but I was really freaked out because of all the snow disappearing. I didn't mention it though, and tried not to dwell on it, because I didn't want to freak myself out anymore. So was this a glitch in the Matrix? I couldn't have been dreaming because I asked my family if they remembered going to the rest stop, and they did. They even mentioned me tripping. I asked my brother earlier today if he remembered there being any snow, and he said no. This is crazy crap. Case notes, file number 563. So what immediately popped into my head is another example of quantum immortality. I think people would be surprised at how fragile the human body can be. Resilient, sure, in many ways, but delicate in so many others. You said snow was falling. You tripped and your face crashed into the snow. What likely happened? There was snowfall in your original universe. Your face landed hard on it, but the buildup of snow was insufficient to prevent your face from hitting the cement underneath the snow. Hard enough to injure your brain, killing you instantly, possibly rupturing a major blood vessel in your brain. I've heard of this happening when people fall long distances. Their bodies are all fine. Effectively, it's an ultra-damaging concussion. Then, as your body dies in that universe, your consciousness instantly shifts to a parallel one. Only difference you notice, at least immediately, is it's not snowing in this new one. The people we love don't know about quantum immortality. All they know is their loved one died. It certainly puts a damper on this immortality angle. Yes, we persist, but it's still absolutely brutal for all the loved ones we leave behind in that first universe. Case file number 564, written by Mafty. The Stalker, not of this world. Hello, so I have a really weird neighbor. He gives me the creeps, although he isn't your stereotypical creep. Let me explain. His apartment is right in front of me. I can see everything going on because he never closes the blinds, or maybe he doesn't have them. He only comes to the apartment once or twice a week, always at night. Sometimes he brings different women with him. His house is completely empty from furniture, like no sofa, chairs, fridge, TV, nothing. Empty. When he comes to the apartment, he drives a car. Then he takes his motorcycle and leaves the car. When he leaves for a while, he goes on the car, and when it's for a short period, he takes the motorcycle. The creepiest part is what he does when he is home. He sits on a lonely chair and stares out of his kitchen window directly at my house for hours, lights on. Sometimes his lights are off. He just sits there, not moving, for up to 7 to 8 hours, not even playing on his phone. He only does this when he is alone. When he has women around, only one at a time, he goes to his bedroom and closes the blinds. So here's the glitch. In order to get to my third floor apartment, I needed to walk past the parking lot, and I see him standing there, just standing, staring into the distance. I walk past him, go up the stairs, and when I look down, I see him there, standing like a statue. Then I look up and see him sitting in his kitchen, staring as usual at my apartment. I did a double take, and he wasn't standing in the parking lot anymore. Let me make this clear. It took me 1 second to raise my head from seeing him down to seeing him upstairs. I have no idea how it happened. I walked past him. He was wearing the same clothes when I saw him upstairs. He had to run across the parking lot and up 2 flights of stairs, then bolt to his apartment directly in front of me. Our buildings mirror each other in less than a second. I don't know what happened, but he is still staring. Gives me the creeps. Bonus file, written by Big Pango. Dad's Comfort from Beyond. My dad died a few days after Christmas from a long, hard illness. I knew he wasn't doing well and convinced him to move near me and help take care of him the last year he was alive. I lived very far from my other family for school, and he was living in a different region as well. There were definitely moments that I was overwhelmed and frustrated, and I was constantly worried about him. Plus, it was very difficult to see him becoming sicker. I stayed next to his bed the night I knew he was dying and provided morphine his nurse gave me every couple of hours so he was not in pain. I felt his last heartbeats. I've spent a lot of moments near his vase of ashes, crying the past couple months. Last night, I was alone and placed my hand on his ashes and told him I love him and missed him very much. I apologize if I ever caused stress for him, as I was sometimes overwhelmed in trying to handle school. I told him it had been a hard time for me to see him so sick, and again that I loved him so much. I placed his wedding ring on top of his vase. In the middle of the night, I had a dream I was just walking by myself on my college campus, not really going anywhere specific. Through a crowd of students, I saw him. He was standing still and waving to me. He didn't really look weak or sick. He was wheelchair bound by the end. He looked healthy and young, like he did when I was a child. I ran to him and hugged him. I looked at him in shock, and he asked if I was okay. I said, "Yes, Dad, you died. I'm so sorry. I never thought I'd see you again." He smiled and laughed and said, "I know. It's okay. I'm not sad about it. It's all okay." We then sat together on a nearby bench in the warm sun and talked and cuddled. I'm not sure what we talked about, but it felt like happy things. And then I woke up. I feel calm and comforted. I feel like my dad may have been trying to comfort me. Bonus file, written by Juicy Gargoyle. My son gave me a warning from my dreams. My son is 5 and was recently diagnosed with autism. His speech is very limited, but he can say several words and a few phrases. Yesterday, he had a doctor's appointment and had to get his vaccinations. Of course, after getting vaccinations, you can feel down a bit, especially the next day. Fast forward to this morning, around 6 a.m. He is sleeping beside me, and I'm asleep as well. I was having a dream that we were at my grandparents' house and that he, my son, was upstairs playing. While still dreaming, I hear him clearly yelling, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, mommy," which is what he will usually do when he needs my help. So in the dream, I go to him, and as soon as I pick him up, he starts gagging. I then immediately wake up from the dream. Not even 20 seconds after I wake up, I hear him gagging in his sleep, about to vomit. Confused as hell at this point, but in autopilot mode, then turn him on his side and hold him while he pukes. This was so wild to me because he was in a deep sleep and would not and could not have called out for me in the clear, bold tone that he used in my dream. He was right beside me, so I would have woken up from the clear yelling of "Mommy" multiple times, way sooner. He started gagging after I woke up. When I first looked over at him, he was not gagging. It was literally like 20 seconds after I woke up that he started to gag. I've never been able to communicate with someone else that is living via dreams and have the connection transferred from a dream state to consciousness or reality. So this was odd but cool to me. Case file number 565, written by SNC Fan, The Magical School Bus. I've been thinking about this a lot since it happened 2 days ago, and I don't know what to think. I was driving to school on Friday, and I was on a narrow back road with lots of hills because my school is in the middle of nowhere, and the back roads are my quickest way to get there. I saw a big yellow school bus driving down the road, as I often saw and dreaded seeing on this road because it was so narrow, and I could tell that the bus and I would be driving past each other right on a big hill that you can't see over once you are close to it. So to avoid crashing head-on or sideswiping the bus, I slowed down and moved over as far to the side of the road as I could as I approached the hill. However, when I reached the top of the hill, there was no school bus in sight. I could see the end of the back road that I was on, and there are no crossroads, parking lots, alleys, or anything like that where the bus could have turned. I drive this road nearly every single day, so I would know. There's also no way that the bus could have turned around and went back the other way on this narrow road, especially within the short amount of time between when I first saw the bus and 3 to 5 seconds later when I reached the top of the hill and saw that there was actually no bus. There were no other cars between this hill where I was and the other end of the road, so it's not like I could have mistaken a car for a school bus either. I've tried to make sense of it and come up with explanations, but I can't think of any. Please let me know what you think. This has been bothering me for days, and I don't really know what to think of it. It's one of those experiences that makes you question everything. Bonus file, written by Shia Surprise, The Great Bathroom Haunting. So the last time anything happened around here was around 2 to 3 years ago. Nothing really happened after my previous encounters, and eventually I moved to another house last year. I've been living in a new house for just under a year now, and I thought everything was going to be cool until what happened yesterday. So it's just another day. I wake up and do my daily routine. The day is going great. I go to the bathroom to do my business while browsing Reddit. Suddenly, I see and hear the washroom door get bashed in. I crap myself right there. Good thing I was already on the toilet, since there was no one there and I live alone. I check the door and there's no evidence of any damage on the door or to the frame. The door was still locked. I just can't comprehend what the hell happened. How can something bash a door in but not leave any sort of damage or trace? There was nothing behind the door either. Now this house is old as hell and lacks soundproofing. You can hear everything, and I mean everything. You can hear sounds from the basement to the top floor, and let me tell you, it was dead silent the whole time till that door opened. Now, this will sound like such a long stretch, but I believe this is one of the previous things I've encountered, or some sort of leader of these entities, letting me know that no matter what I do, no matter where I go, they're not too far behind, and they could have ended me a long time ago. I'm pretty sure they're just messing with me, but sending a message at the same time. Rarely, I wake up with a tiny little cut or scratch around my arms and legs, though I think it's just my own nails causing it while I'm asleep. But it could possibly be related to this. There have been odd things that have happened rarely too, like the sounds of some small objects falling. But I think it's just the stuff in my drying rack sliding around. What concerns me the most is the food-related items disappearing, but it shows up in a different place, days or weeks later. It's been about 2 weeks since I posted this. Thought I'd give you guys an update. I checked my smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, and nothing is wrong with them. I changed the batteries in them just in case. I did set up some cameras as you guys suggested, but nothing has been caught yet. Case notes, bonus file. I would too crap myself if anything remotely similar happened to me. It's actually a sort of phobia I have, to be attacked while doing one's business. Naturally, we're more vulnerable in that state, but far worse if I was being played with by a malevolent force. There was a story a while back I read where a presence was attached to a specific room rather than a person, and it was affecting the family's mother potently, making her ill. They brought in a priest to cleanse the place, and it seemed to work. The mother recovered quickly after. I don't know if it's tied to a specific religion or more the strong will of a person demanding this presence to effectively cease and desist. Might be something to look into if you can't find any other way to escape whatever this is. File number 566, written by Fanfiction Music Lover. Dreams of Another's Memories. This is a series of events I haven't pieced together until last summer, aka summer of 2021. So, when I was younger, around the age of 10 years old, we visited for the third time in my life, and the first time I remember clearly, my great-aunt Eugenia's house in Aigio, Greece. This time was the first we visited, and she wasn't with us anymore. She had passed away. That summer, I remember it very vividly, because I had constant dreams of her visiting me and lighting up the holy candle that was hanging over my bed at night. It was something she used to do when we were visiting because at the time there was faulty wiring in my room. So we didn't use any of the plugs, and the candlelight also worked as a nightlight, so I wouldn't stumble on any furniture at night when I get up to use the bathroom. Usually after those dreams, I would wake up to find the holy candle lit or slowly going out since it was morning. That summer also was the first time I was allowed to explore the neighborhood with my 5-year-old sister, but not as far as we would have liked. But one evening, my dad and my aunt Helena had a fight. And when Dad gets angry, he leaves and goes for long walks. It's something he does to calm himself down. That evening, I heard the fight, and I wanted to console him, so I quickly ran after him. We walked around the neighborhood in our PJs and flip-flops, as we enjoyed the sunset and the sea view we had, as we talked about various things but the fight. On our way back home, after Mom called my dad, we passed the house on 39th Konstantinopolios Street. I remember it looked so jarringly familiar that I froze before it, and my dad unknowingly kept pulling as we were holding hands. I didn't know why it looked familiar, so I pushed that memory aside. Years go by, and it's 2018. We are visiting the house again. This time, I had an anxiety attack that was so bad that Mom suggested I remove myself from the house. Where was the thing that caused me my anxiety, aka my phone and social media? And I listened to her, left my phone, wore my shoes, and I left the house. Just as I was trying to shut the door in my frantic state, Dad stopped me, saying I shouldn't be alone now, so he tagged along. We walked the same route as all those years ago. My anxiety attack slowly faded away, and we sat by a bench enjoying the sunset when I finally calmed down completely. On our way back, I saw the house again, and this time I was sure it looked familiar because I had seen it in a dream. Yet I couldn't pinpoint the dream. I would visit this house many more times during the summer of 2018 and 2019, trying to make my mind recall the dream. It was summer of 2020 when I was talking on the phone, and since on the street we have better cell phone signals, I was pacing around the neighborhood when I heard music coming from down the street. Now keep in mind, this neighborhood is located above nightclubs, and it was summer. Music is always present either by the nightclubs or because many of the houses in the area are summer homes and everyone has windows open. But this music didn't fit in. It sounded like it was coming from a gramophone. While listening to my friend rambling, I started following the music, and the moment I stopped before the house, the music stopped. I jumped when I heard the sound of a glass breaking that came from the balcony of a house next to the one I was staring at. I shook my head, thinking again that it came from a different house, and the sound just spread out. Summer 2021, I'm walking down the same path with my dad as a leisure walk this time, and we are discussing architecture of the early 20th century, when my dad stops before the very same house and points out how the house looks old, but the terrace looks relatively new, maybe 1950s. That was when I automatically corrected him, saying that the terrace is older, but the renovation might have been around the 1950s. He looked at me confused, wondering how I knew that, but I just shrugged and pointed lamely that the brick that the whole house was covered in was exactly the same, but the railings were different. If they hadn't stored the bricks to use later, it must have been built all at the same time. My dad gave up after that, saying that I was right, and we kept walking. As we were walking, a small breeze blew, and I heard the gramophone music again. That was the moment I remember the dream. That was a dream of me watching some young girls around the early 1910s, walking towards that house as music from the house was able to be heard all the way down the street. I didn't know who those ladies were, but they were around 17 years old, maybe some early 20s. I watched them entering the house that looked in very good condition, not as abandoned as I grew up watching in real life. I remember I followed those girls inside the house where there was a party happening. That was when I realized the time period. It was a send-off party. The eldest son of his household was going to fight World War I, and all his friends and family threw him a party to say goodbye. They were quite rich, judging by how the house was decorated. I remember watching a couple in that terrace looking at the sky and talking about how fragile life is, and that when the war ends, the man would marry the girl. And the girl told him not to make promises he can't keep, because life is unexpected. After that, I felt myself being pulled back, and I found myself watching the house, and this time I saw my grandma and great-aunt Eugenia standing outside of it, holding each other's arms, and I wanted to yell out to them to say hi, and that I was there, when I realized they couldn't see me. I had nobody. I was just watching everything. Judging by how old my grandma and great-aunt Eugenia were, I would say it was around the early 1950s, and I could see construction happening around the house. My grandma and her sister, they asked what they were fixing to the construction worker, and he answered they were fixing the railings because the granddaughter was bringing her fiancé from Australia, and the wedding would take place in the house. Grandma and her little sister commented how happy they were for the granddaughter to finally settle down and wished the construction worker good luck before leaving and continuing their stroll. I followed them, but I kept feeling pulled back, and I was screaming for my grandma to hear me. The last thing I heard was my grandma talking to her sister about the job she took in Pella as a teacher, and was wondering if it was worth it to be this far away from Aigeo, their hometown. After that, I was pulled back into the house and was somehow now abandoned, and I couldn't get out. I was crying and slamming my fists against the main door. Something else scared me after that because I had jumped up awake and was crying in my sleep. I have no idea what that was, all of these memories that I recalled in the dream, but they aren't mine. I went back and started staring at the old house and wondering why I was watching this dream when I was about 10 years old. I haven't had a dream about that house ever since, but I feel a pull towards that house, and I don't know why. Especially the terrace. Maybe that was me in another life. Case file number 567, written by Princess Rave 24. The Fog of Time. I was in the town next to my own, visiting my best friend as I typically do about 5 times a week. The commute from her house to mine is about 25 minutes, give or take, especially quicker in the evening since traffic is minimal. I know this stretch of road better than any other place on earth. This evening, I set out to go home. When my best friend's husband called her, we exchanged goodbyes as her phone rang and I went off. I was driving along when suddenly an unexpected dense fog appeared. As I pushed through the fog, a small car slammed on their brakes. In turn, I slammed on mine. The car in front crept along slowly, so I decided to pass them. I pulled in front of the vehicle and was relieved to see the patch of fog clear up just a few minutes after it had started. However, I looked in my rear view and the car I went around was no longer behind me, which I thought was concerning, since we were traveling on a mountain highway, giving them no chance to turn off. But things only got stranger from there. As I continued on, I passed by a landmark I'm certain that I had driven past prior to the fog setting in. At first, I played it off thinking I was getting tired, or my mind was playing tricks on me due to the stress of the unexpected stop. But then I looked at the clock. 20 minutes had passed since I had left my friend's house, and I was nowhere near home. Could I have looked at the time wrong? I drove for a couple minutes in deep thought when I remembered the phone call my friend received. She could help me sort this out. I called her to see if she could tell me what time I had left, and she confirmed that the time I had been traveling was correct. I had been driving for 30 minutes at this time, and I was still about 10 minutes from home. Ever since, I've been trying to think of some sort of explanation, but I've got nothing other than it has to be a glitch in the Matrix. Anyone else have theories? Case notes, file number 567. This gives me the Mist vibes. Yep. No freaky spiders with acid webs. That's good. Still most concerning. One notable part is that you were able to get a connection to your friend via cell phone after. So you weren't taken out into a pocket of dead zone unless this fog represented the transition phase, and after you left it, effectively you returned to your normal state. It would also explain the relative time loss and position change. I always want to say aliens when time distortions are involved, but the fog leads me away from that. No, I think this was some sort of vortex or portal. As I understand it scientifically, they shouldn't be possible, and yet this isn't the first story that appears to contradict that fact. It also shows that whatever these portals are, they're more than just a zip from one place to another through space-time. There are other people there living normal lives, just driving along. And why did the person driving suddenly brake when you saw him through the fog? Maybe, my theory, is he witnessed you in his rearview mirror materializing from thin air. That would freak anyone out. And I would definitely brake to see what the hell's going on. Case file number 568, written by 2 bratty cats. The creepiest drive of my life. This happened to me about 2 years ago. Some friends and I were driving up to a spot that we visit often. It's literally one highway the entire way because it cuts through mountains. It's the only way to get there, the only road. You can't mistakenly go on another road. Anyway, the drive is about 2.5 hours. We've done this drive almost a dozen times. We had the GPS going just to keep us aware of exactly where we were and how much time we had left, even though we didn't really need it for directions. I mean, it's one road straight through, it's hard to get lost. At some point, we noticed that the GPS hasn't given us updates in a long time, and that it's no longer working. Weird, but it's one of those older dash-mounted ones, so maybe it just finally crapped out. What was weird was, we went to check the time, and we hadn't yet reached a landmark we should have hit 30 minutes ago. We all laugh about how the driver needs to pick up the pace and think nothing of it, until another 30 minutes pass, and another. And suddenly, we're already confused. We keep driving and driving and driving, but it feels like we're getting nowhere, and we've now exceeded what should have been the total time for the entire trip. We're all looking at the time on our phones in disbelief. Remember, this drive is literally one road. It's the only road. There's no possible way to make a wrong turn. We're not passing any landmarks, just trees and rocks, and more trees and rocks. We kept the time on our phones for another couple of hours until everyone but the driver fell asleep. When we woke up, over 5 hours had passed. The driver remarked that he was tired and didn't remember much of the drive. Somehow, we drove for over 5 hours on what is a 2.5-hour drive, and that didn't seem to end until we fell asleep. We all have kind of a foggy memory of what we talked about during the ride and when we fell asleep. We also know not one of us saw the landmark we were waiting on, despite it being literally impossible to miss, and something we always watch out for. It's literally part of the appeal of the trip. One of the weirdest experiences in my life, and I get this weird feeling that washes over me every time I think about it. Bonus file, written by The Other Lady, D, the life-saving ghost. This happened to me one day and I wanted to share. I was a college student and I was home for vacations, along with my parents and my 2 siblings. That makes us 5 people in the house. Of all of us, I'm the only one who's a night owl. I stay up really late and sleep in the morning. This one night, after I finished cleaning up and putting everything back in place, I went up to my room and started reading a book as usual. Sometime later, I heard knocking on my door. It was pretty late, but I thought it was one of my family members, so I said, "Come in," but no one came. I went and opened the door and didn't find anyone. Everything was calm and it seemed like everyone was asleep. I went back to my room. I had barely settled back in bed when I heard knocking again. It creeped me out. I opened the door again and no one was there. I wanted to shake the fear off, so I started checking the house, the hallway, the bathroom, etc. Then I went down to the first story and kept checking, and I heard a noise in the kitchen. I went to see what the noise was, but the kitchen was empty. Then I looked at the gas stove and realized it was on. I'd forgotten to turn it off. I turned it off and went back to my room. No more knocking on the door. Next morning, I asked everyone if they heard anything at night, and they all said no. What are the chances of me, the only person awake, to hear noises and be led all the way to the kitchen to turn off the stove I left on? Case file number 569, written by Roddy Rooted. The Yellow Sunglasses. This happened 3 to 4 years back. I lived in a home for a year after college and decided to go for a run one morning. I live on a cul-de-sac in a rural area that has a trail surrounding the whole neighborhood, about a mile or so looping. It was warm, so I dressed appropriately, put on my headphones, and started my run. About halfway through, I rounded a corner of the trail with decent but not good visibility, and there was a man standing there that scared the crap out of me. In my perspective, he came out of nowhere. Embarrassed, I stopped my run and took out my headphones to catch my breath and say hello, given he had to be a neighbor because this isn't a marked or well-known trail at all. I noticed he was dressed strangely for the time of year, but didn't think much about it until after. He had on a bluish/purplish jacket, long pants, a beanie, and yellow sunglasses. He looked like a skier from a 70s or 80s movie, bearded. I told him how badly he startled me, and we both chuckled, and he asked me where I was from. I told him from this neighborhood and the street name. Again, it was a dead-end cul-de-sac. He asked me if they finally finished that development. I've lived on the street my entire life. It was completed over 20 years ago. I told him yes. We must be thinking of different ones because of this. He looked confused, and then I said goodbye and continued my run. I ran for no more than 20 feet before the eeriness of the conversation got the best of me, and I looked back, and he was completely gone. There's no way I can imagine that he'd have been able to move out of sight that quickly. The last details I want to add for this post are that I'm not superstitious, but this was eerie and still freaks me out to this day. I also, in telling the story to my family an hour after it happened, recalled in my telling that I didn't remember seeing any skin on him. To be clear, I'm not saying I observed a lack of skin. I just do not recall seeing any exposed skin anywhere on his face or otherwise. He was covered in clothing from head to toe. Case file number 570, written by Noodle Q. I am Pisces, Lord of Water. Me and a friend were hanging out on a hot summer day at this little waterway that drains into a large river. I sometimes go there when it's hot, and I put my feet in the water because it's cold and it feels refreshing. My friend, although very spiritual, believes in a whole bunch of stuff, including flat earth, which I don't believe in at all, but I like to pick his brain on things just to try and understand his perspective. Anyways, on this day, he was going on about how I am God, you are God. We all create our own universe and reality. I was entertained by the thought of this, as I sat there with the quarter-inch deep water just barely running over the bottom of my feet, but still not deep, it felt good as it was cold water on that hot summer day. Anyways, after a while of my friend explaining all of this create your own reality stuff, I decided to humor him for a moment. I was like, okay, so if what you're saying is true, then I can right now command the water levels to just rise and they will? To which he said, sure, anything is possible. You just have to believe it and see. So I look upstream, put my arms out, and all dead serious say out loud something like, I command you, water, to rush forth. Sort of half serious, but also trying to actually visualize and believe it. We stand there in silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then I give up, saying, yeah, okay, that didn't work, surprisingly. Then, after another minute or two passed, the water went from quarter-inch deep maximum and started rushing heavily until it was closer to 6 inches deep, up to my ankles, rushing fast. Like I had to sit down at the edge because I was worried I would slip. I looked over at my friend like, what the hell? And he was just like, I told you so. I'm still not sure what could have possibly happened right then. In any explainable logical way, I've run through many possible scenarios that just still don't add up. I've never seen the water levels change like that before or since, and I haven't tried doing that type of thing again because it really did threaten to shatter my understanding of everything, which may sound cool, but could also possibly drive me insane. To my flat earth friend, that was just normal stuff, but to me, it really made me wonder, how much control do we actually have over our reality? Is reality that easily malleable? Or maybe, since I'm a Pisces, water sign, I have some connection with just water itself? Maybe in my subconscious, I heard a rush of water a mile away when I decided to try and summon it and just trick myself? I don't think I'll ever know, but it's certainly some food for thought. Case notes, file number 570. Avatar the Waterbender. Impressive. But this is a fun brain teaser in seriousness. There are possible mundane explanations. As you mentioned, our subconscious can pick up on minutiae and details in our environment that aren't passed down through the filter to our conscious experience. Our brains are constantly filtering out so much information, vastly more than we get to experience. Which, by the way, is a very good thing, because there's far too much data to process. Some people actually have a condition where they have no filter, or they have a limited filter, and they typically go insane as a result. Anyways, maybe your brain did pick up on sound cues from far away, or maybe you had read something about a spillway opening up and forgot about it, but inside your subconscious knew when they were going to open it to raise the water levels. Or hell, maybe you really did command the water levels to rise. In that case, did the universe physically materialize more water? Or did you divert a stream up ahead? It did take a few minutes for the stream level to rise, so probably the latter if it was a command received by the universe. Next time, of course, wish for more money, or at least food. Case file number 571, written by Menace17. Racing to my inevitable death. All across the country, there are local short tracks like the ovals you see in NASCAR where people can race several different kinds of cars every week. I've always loved NASCAR and my goal is to race at Daytona one day. Ever since I was 11, I've been racing at a local racetrack in Florida and sometimes at other short tracks around the state when there are big races going on. Right now, I race what are known as super late models, which is the closest you can get to an actual NASCAR race car. Over the years, I've gotten to be a pretty good driver, usually winning multiple times per year. This is gonna sound off topic, but until September of last year, I never believed in the supernatural. But then something very unusual happened that made me reconsider my future as a racer. It was a beautiful Saturday night, and I was getting ready for a big 200-lap race that over 30 other drivers were gonna be in. I was gonna start in third place, but about half an hour before the race, something in my gut told me not to get into the car. But when you're a race car driver, you get used to being nervous and just have to suck it up and deal with it. This time was different though. I had this nagging feeling that something terrible was going to happen if I got into the car. Even though I couldn't shake the feeling, I still got into my car. And by the time the green flag waved and the race started, I had kind of forgotten about it. About 10 laps in, 2 cars spun behind me and hit the inside wall. The caution flag flew, signaling for all the drivers to slow down and follow the pace car as the wreck was cleaned up. The feeling came back. This time, however, it made me feel physically sick and I couldn't race feeling the way I did. So I went through the opening in the turn 1 wall that led to the parking lot where all the race teams worked on their cars. I threw up as soon as I undid my belts and climbed out of my car, and me and my crew packed up and headed home. My friend Pete drove me home as I laid back in the passenger seat, trying to get some rest. The next thing I knew, I was hovering over the racetrack, watching as the cars battled for position, inches apart, trying to make as much ground as they could. As I looked down on the track, one of the cars caught my eye. A familiar white and red car running in 9th place, with a black number 62 on the sides of the car and on the roof. It was my car. I remember being confused and flying down to the ground to get a better view, and I landed in the infield in turn 1, watching myself racing to stay in the top 10. About 5 laps went by before the unthinkable happened. My car, that was being driven by me, launched off the side of another car as me and the driver next to me battled for position. I watched as my car slid into the opening in the turn 1 wall at over 100 miles per hour, hitting the driver's side first. The hit was so hard that it ripped my car in half and tore everything below my hips off. The back half of my car, with me still in the seat, slid back down onto the track as I listened to myself screaming in agony. The other drivers swerved, trying to avoid the 2 pieces of my car, but one driver hit me head on, ripping even more off the part of the car I was in and putting me out of my misery. I watched as my head, ribs, lungs, guts, and other organs and pieces of my bones and skin went flying all over the track, some into the stands where people were watching. A few drivers spun in puddles of my blood as they went by. This description doesn't do justice to what I saw. I looked at the terrible scene for a few seconds and everything went black. I opened my eyes to find myself back in the reclined passenger seat of Pete's pickup truck, where I fell asleep trying to make myself feel better. Luckily I did, and I woke up just as we got back to my house. I thanked him and headed in. As horrifying as it was at the time, I wasn't going to let it bother me. Race car drivers sometimes think about fatal crashes as a possibility, but we accept the danger. You have to accept it whenever you do anything dangerous. The next day, I woke up at around 9:30, and after I had breakfast, brushed my teeth, and did everything else you'd expect someone to do in the morning, I went out to my garage where I kept the race car. I was about to get to work, preparing it for next week's race, when I noticed something that made me crap myself, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that. There was a massive dent in the driver's side of the car right about where I hit the wall in that dream. That freaking dream. I looked inside the car where I saw that there was a huge crack going down the roll cage. At that moment, I wondered if I should ever race again. Like I said before, I have never believed in ghosts or spirits or anything paranormal or supernatural. But after I had that terrible dream and saw my car the next day, I started to wonder about a lot of things. Why did I feel a really strong urge to not race that night? Why did I get sick when I tried to? How did my mind paint such a vivid, messed up image in that dream? And lastly, what if it wasn't a dream? What if I really did die in an alternate universe and that dream was a glimpse into it? If I hadn't have gotten sick in my car that night, would I have lived to race another day? Would everyone that was there be forever traumatized by the sight of my dismembered body flying everywhere? If it was just a bad dream, why did my car have damage in the same place I wrecked it in the dream, even though I didn't wreck it in real life? I'm a believer now. Something was at work that night that I think kept me alive, and somehow I feel like I would have died a horrible death if it wasn't. I feel lucky to still be racing today, but it's terrifying to think about things like this. Case file number 572, written by Reddit user 238, a miracle ID. My whole life, my mom has told me to pray to Saint Anthony to find things. Dear Saint Anthony, please look around for my item. It must be found. And I can't remember a time it has failed, but the skeptic in me also has reason that the items would have come up at some point without Saint Anthony's help. My mind changed today. About 2 weeks ago, I was pulled over for speeding, and I guess when the officer gave me back my license, I didn't put it back in my wallet, which is uncharacteristic of me to do. I've been searching everywhere. I turned the car upside down, ripping up the floor mats and taking everything out. This ID was not in the car. After almost 2 weeks of searching for it, I began to feel anxious because I'm going on a flight and will need it to travel a week from now, and I wouldn't have enough time to order a new one. Yesterday, I thought I would flip my car upside down one more time and nothing. But the whole time, I was praying to Saint Anthony. The next morning, today, I kid you not, my ID was just laying on the passenger side floor. There is simply no explanation. Thank you, dear Saint Anthony. I am now undoubtedly a believer.